The moment Clara Bennett stepped off that dusty train in 1887 New Mexico, she knew something was terribly wrong. This wasn't Creekstone. This was nowhere. But before she could even process her mistake, a small hand grabbed hers and a child's voice pierced through her panic. "Mama! Papa, she's here! God finally answered us!" The little girl's tearful joy froze Clara in place. She'd gotten off at the wrong station, met the wrong family, yet somehow she'd never felt more exactly where she needed to be. Stay with me, friends, as I tell you how one woman's greatest mistake became her greatest destiny. And hey, drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The desert heat of New Mexico Territory in August 1887 was unlike anything Clara Bennett had ever experienced in her 24 years of life. It pressed against her like a living thing, seeping through the thin fabric of her best traveling dress, a navy blue cotton that had seemed so practical when she'd purchased it in Philadelphia 3 weeks ago. Now, standing on the wooden platform of what should have been Creekstone Station, the dress clung to her skin with perspiration, and the matching hat that had cost her nearly a week's wages from her factory job felt like it was slowly cooking her brain. Clara's gloved fingers trembled as she pulled the letter from her carpet bag for what must have been the 100th time since leaving Pennsylvania. The paper, once crisp and official-looking, had grown soft from handling, and the corner where the crucial directions had been written was torn, victim of an unfortunate encounter with spilled coffee during a particularly rough stretch of track through Kansas. "Creekstone Station," she whispered to herself, squinting at the smudged ink. "Take the road north to the ranch." The rest was illegible, a watery blur of what had once been precise instructions from Mr. Theodore Morrison, the man who had placed the advertisement for a mail-order bride in the Philadelphia Inquirer. She looked up at the weathered sign hanging crookedly from the station roof. Through the dust and glare, she could make out the letters. Dust Creek. Her heart plummeted into her stomach like a stone dropped down a well. "Excuse me," she called out to the station master, a grizzled man with skin like leather who was loading mail bags onto a cart. "Sir? Is this Creekstone?" He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt and squinted at her. "Creekstone? Lady, you're in Dust Creek. Creekstone's another 40 miles west. Train don't stop there but once a week." "Once a week?" Clara's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Yep, next one's on Thursday." He looked her up and down, taking in her city clothes and pale skin. "You got folks expecting you." Clara's throat tightened. Yes, she had someone expecting her, a stranger who had paid for her passage, who was probably waiting at the correct station right now, checking his pocket watch and wondering where his bride had gone. The humiliation burned hotter than the desert sun. There's been a mistake," she managed. The station master's expression softened slightly. "Hotel's 2 blocks down Main Street. Mrs. Abernathy runs a clean place, doesn't charge too much neither." Clara nodded numbly, bending to pick up her carpet bag and the small trunk that contained everything she owned in the world. The weight of them seemed to have tripled in the heat. She had exactly $3.47 to her name. Barely enough for a night or two at any hotel, certainly not enough to last until Thursday. She took a step toward the edge of the platform, and that's when it happened. A small force collided with her skirts, a tiny whirlwind of calico and tangled blonde curls that wrapped thin arms around Clara's legs with surprising strength. "Mama!" the child cried, her voice muffled against Clara's skirts. "Mama, you're here! You're finally here!" Clara froze, her hands instinctively reaching down but not quite touching the child. "I'm sorry, sweetie, but I'm not..." "Sophie!" A man's voice, deep and rough as sandpaper, cut through the air. "Sophie, let go of the lady!" Clara looked up to see a man striding toward them, and for a moment the oppressive heat seemed to dissipate. He was tall, easily 6 feet or more, with broad shoulders that stretched the fabric of his work shirt. His face was all angles and shadows beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see his jaw was clenched with what looked like embarrassment or frustration. Dark hair, in need of a cut, curled at his collar, and when he got close enough, she saw his eyes were the color of sage honey, golden green in the harsh sunlight. "Sophie," he said again, gentler this time, reaching for the child. Come on, little bird. This isn't Mama, but Sophie only held on tighter, turning her face up to look at Clara with eyes that were enormous and blue as cornflowers, swimming with tears. But Papa, she is. Look at her. She has yellow hair just like in my dreams, and she smells like flowers, and God sent her on the train just like I asked. The man's face colored beneath his tan, and he crouched down, his large hands gentle as they tried to pry his daughter's arms loose. I'm real sorry, ma'am, he said, not quite meeting Clara's eyes. She gets confused sometimes. Her mama passed 2 years back, and she's got it in her head that God's going to send us a new mama, Sophie interrupted, her chin jutting out stubbornly. And he did. She's right here. Sophie Marie Cooper, the man's voice held a warning. You're embarrassing this nice lady. Now let go. But Clara found herself kneeling down, her skirts pooling in the dust, until she was eye level with the little girl. There was something in those blue eyes, a desperate hope that Clara recognized all too well. She'd seen it in her own mirror often enough. Hello, Sophie, she said softly. My name is Clara. Miss Clara Bennett. Sophie's grip loosened slightly, but she didn't let go entirely. That's a pretty name, she whispered. Prettier than Mama's was. Her name was Margaret, but Papa called her Maggie. Sophie, her father warned again. It's all right, Clara said, looking up at him. This close, she could see the weariness etched in the lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders seemed to carry more weight than just physical labor could account for. She's not bothering me. He straightened, running a hand through his hair and displacing his hat. Jack Cooper, he said, offering his hand to help her stand. And you've met Sophie. Again, I apologize. She saw you get off the train with your bags, and she just took off running before I could stop her. Clara accepted his hand, noting the calluses and strength in it, the way he immediately let go once she was steady on her feet. Mr. Cooper, I'm a bit lost, I'm afraid. I was supposed to get off at Creekstone, but there seems to have been a misunderstanding. Creekstone? Jack frowned. That's a fair piece from here. You got family there? Clara felt the heat rise in her cheeks. How did one explain that she was meant to marry a complete stranger? That she'd answered an advertisement like she was applying for a position as a governess or seamstress, only the position was wife. I have a situation there. Employment, she said, which wasn't entirely a lie. Sophie, who had transferred her grip from Clara's skirts to her hand, piped up. You could work for us. We need lots of help. The dishes pile up something awful, and Papa can't braid hair for nothing, and nobody reads stories the right way anymore, and— Sophie, Jack interrupted, but his voice was fond despite his exasperation. Miss Bennett has her own plans. Actually, Clara said, the words coming out before she could stop them, I find myself in need of temporary lodging until Thursday's train. The station master mentioned a hotel, but— She trailed off, pride warring with practicality. Jack studied her for a moment, and Clara had the unsettling feeling he could see right through her, see the near-empty purse, the desperation she was trying so hard to hide, the humiliating truth that she'd traveled across the country to marry a man she'd never met and couldn't even manage to get off at the right station. Papa, Sophie tugged on his hand, she could stay with us. In the guest room, the one Aunt Martha uses when she visits, except she never visits anymore because she says we live in the middle of nowhere and it's too dusty, and— Sophie, breathe, Jack said, but he was looking at Clara. The hotel in town is— Well, it's not much, and Mrs. Abernathy charges city prices for frontier accommodations. We've got a ranch about 3 miles north of here. Nothing fancy, but there's a clean room and board if you're willing to help out some with Sophie in the house. Just until Thursday. Clara knew she should say no. Every proper instinct drilled into her from childhood screamed that staying with an unmarried man, even with a child present, was scandalous. But then she looked down at Sophie's hopeful face, felt the weight of her nearly empty purse, thought about the letter from Theodore Morrison that might as well be worthless paper now. That's very kind of you, Mr. Cooper, she heard herself saying. I wouldn't want to impose. It's not an imposition if you're working, Jack said practically. Sophie's right about the dishes, and the laundry, and pretty much everything else. I'm good with cattle and horses, but domestic things. He shrugged, a gesture that somehow made him seem younger, less intimidating. Please, Miss Clara. Sophie bounced on her toes. Please, please, please. I promise I'll be good. I'll eat all my vegetables, even the lima beans, and I won't track mud in the house, and I'll go to bed when Papa says, and all right, Clara said, surprising herself with how quickly she agreed. Just until Thursday. Sophie let out a whoop that probably could have been heard in Creekstone, and Jack's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. My wagon's just there, he said, nodding toward a well-worn buckboard weighted with 2 patient horses. Let me get your things. Before Clara could protest, he had hefted her trunk like it weighed nothing and was carrying it toward the wagon. Sophie kept hold of Clara's hand, chattering about everything and nothing. Her favorite hen named Penelope, the barn cat that had kittens last month, the creek that ran behind their property where Papa said she couldn't swim alone, but maybe now Miss Clara could take her. As Jack secured her belongings in the wagon bed, Clara caught him watching her with Sophie, something unreadable in those honey-green eyes. When he caught her looking back, he quickly busied himself with checking the horses' harnesses. All set, he said, coming around to help them up onto the bench seat. His hands were careful, respectful, as he assisted Clara, and then he swung Sophie up with practiced ease. The little girl immediately snuggled against Clara's side, as if they'd known each other for years instead of minutes. Jack climbed up on Clara's other side, and suddenly the bench seemed much smaller. She was acutely aware of the heat radiating from him, the scent of leather and soap, and something uniquely masculine that made her stomach do an unexpected flutter. Thank you, Clara said quietly as he gathered the reins. This is very generous of you. He glanced at her, and for just a moment his careful facade cracked. She saw something there. Loneliness, perhaps, or a grief that matched the desperate hope in his daughter's eyes. Sometimes, he said, clicking his tongue to set the horses in motion, folks just end up where they're meant to be, even if it's not where they planned. As the wagon rolled away from the station, away from her mistake and toward an unknown future, Clara found herself hoping he was right. Sophie's small hand crept into hers, and Clara held on, letting the child's innocent faith anchor her in this strange new world. The road north from Dust Creek was rough, barely more than 2 ruts carved into the red earth by countless wagon wheels. Jack handled the horses with easy competence, his hands steady on the reins as they navigated around the worst of the holes and rocks. Sophie kept up a steady stream of chatter, pointing out landmarks. A twisted juniper she called the dancing tree, a rock formation that looked like a sleeping giant, a hawk circling lazy loops in the crystalline sky. That's Mr. Henderson's property line, she said, pointing to a fence that looked like it might blow over in a strong wind. His bull got into our pasture last month, and Papa said words I'm not supposed to repeat, and, Sophie, Jack warned, though Clara could see him fighting a smile. I didn't repeat them, Sophie protested. I just said you said them. Clara found herself laughing, a real laugh that seemed to surprise all 3 of them. It had been so long since she'd laughed like that. Not since before her father's death, before the factory job, before the desperate decision to answer a stranger's advertisement for a wife. Do you have any brothers or sisters, Miss Clara? Sophie asked, tilting her face up to look at her. No, I was an only child, Clara replied. It was just me and my father for most of my life. What happened to your mama? Sophie, Jack's voice was sharper this time. That's not polite to ask. It's all right, Clara said. She died when I was very young. Younger than you are now, Sophie. I don't really remember her. Sophie's hand tightened in hers. That's sad. But at least you had your papa. My papa is the best papa in the whole world. He can ride any horse, even the mean ones, and he makes the best flapjacks on Sunday mornings, and he tells good stories even though he says he doesn't. And once he pulled a calf right out of its mama when it was stuck. Sophie Marie, Jack groaned, his ears reddening. I'm sure Miss Bennett doesn't need to hear about livestock birthing. But Clara was charmed despite herself. He sounds like a very talented man, she said solemnly to Sophie, though she caught Jack's eye with amusement. The landscape began to change as they traveled north. The flat, dusty expanse gave way to gentle rises and dips, and she could see the shimmer of green in the distance that suggested water. Cottonwoods appeared, their leaves rustling in the hot breeze, and the air seemed marginally cooler. "There," Jack said, nodding ahead. "That's our place." Clara looked and felt her breath catch. It wasn't grand, not by any stretch of the imagination. The house was modest, built of adobe and timber, with a wide porch that wrapped around two sides. But it was situated perfectly, nestled against a rise that would provide shelter from the worst of the winter winds, with those cottonwoods offering blessed shade. She could see a barn, sturdy and well-maintained, a chicken coop, a garden that was struggling in the heat, but still showing signs of care. There were flowers, too, surprising splashes of color against the porch railings, sunflowers, and some kind of hardy roses that had managed to survive the desert climate. "Mama planted those," Sophie said, following Clara's gaze to the flowers. "Papa waters them every day, even when he's bone-tired. He says—" She paused, glancing at her father, then continued in a whisper, "He says it's like keeping a little bit of her alive." Clara felt her heart constrict. She looked at Jack, who was steadfastly staring ahead, his jaw tight. As they pulled up to the house, a dog came bounding out, a big yellow mongrel with one ear that stood up and one that flopped over, barking enthusiastically. "That's Moses," Sophie announced. "Papa says he's worthless as a cattle dog, but he's good at keeping coyotes away from the chickens." Jack climbed down and came around to help them. This time, when his hand circled Clara's waist to lift her down, she was prepared for the jolt of awareness that shot through her. What she wasn't prepared for was the way his hands lingered for just a fraction of a second longer than necessary, or the way his eyes darkened when they met hers. "Let me show you the house," he said, his voice rougher than before. The inside was exactly what Clara had expected, and yet not. It was clean but cluttered, organized but lived in. The main room served as both parlor and dining area, with comfortable if worn furniture and a large fireplace that would be welcoming in winter. The kitchen was spacious, with a good stove and plenty of work surface, though dishes were indeed piled in the wash basin as Sophie had warned. "I try to keep up," Jack said, following her gaze. "But between the ranch work and Sophie—" "It's fine," Clara assured him. And it was. It was more than fine. It was real, lived in, honest. Nothing like the cold, sparse rooms she'd shared with other factory girls in Philadelphia, or the austere atmosphere of her childhood home, where her father had treated everything as if it were a museum piece not to be touched. "This is my room!" Sophie dragged her down a hallway, pushing open a door to reveal a small but cheerful space. There were drawings tacked to the walls, horses and flowers, and stick figures that probably represented her family. A well-loved doll sat on a handmade quilt, and books, more than Clara would have expected, were stacked on a shelf. "Papa reads to me every night," Sophie explained, seeing where Clara was looking. "But he doesn't do the voices right. Mama used to do all different voices for the characters. And this will be your room," Jack said, opening the door across the hall. It was simple. A bed with an iron frame, a washstand, a small wardrobe, a chair by the window. But the window looked out toward the cottonwoods and the creek beyond, and late afternoon light was streaming in, painting everything golden. "It's perfect," Clara said, and meant it. "Supper's usually around 6, Jack said, shifting his weight. "Nothing fancy. Sophie can show you where everything is in the kitchen. I need to check on the stock, but I'll be back in an hour or so." He hesitated, as if he wanted to say something more, then simply touched the brim of his hat and left. Clara stood in the middle of the kitchen, Sophie beside her, and wondered what exactly she had gotten herself into. She was supposed to be in Creekstone right now, meeting Theodore Morrison, beginning her new life as a properly married woman. Instead, she was in a stranger's home with a little girl looking at her like she hung the moon, and a man who made her pulse race in a way Theodore Morrison's letters never had. "Miss Clara!" Sophie tugged on her sleeve. "Can we make pie?" "Papa loves pie, but he's terrible at making crust. He says it always turns out like shoe leather." Clara looked down at the hopeful little face and made a decision. Thursday was 4 days away. 4 days to help this small, broken family before moving on to her real life. 4 days to pretend, just a little, that this was where she belonged. "Do you have apples?" she asked. Sophie's smile could have lit up the entire territory. "We have a whole tree full!" As Sophie dragged her outside to show her the apple tree, chattering about the best ones for pie and how Papa liked his with extra cinnamon, Clara caught sight of Jack by the barn. He was watching them, his hat pushed back, that unreadable expression on his face again. When he saw her looking, he didn't turn away this time. Instead, he raised his hand in a small wave, and something in Clara's chest loosened, like a knot she hadn't realized was there finally coming undone. The kitchen was hotter than Clara had anticipated, even with the windows open and the door propped to catch any stray breeze. She'd tied her hair back with a ribbon from her bag and borrowed an apron that had probably belonged to Margaret. It still smelled faintly of lavender, and Sophie had pressed her face into it when Clara first put it on, breathing deep. "That's what Mama smelled like," she'd said quietly, then brightened. "But you smell like roses, and that's nice too." Now Sophie stood on a chair beside her, carefully peeling apples with a knife that Clara made sure wasn't too sharp. The child's tongue poked out in concentration, and Clara found herself utterly charmed by the determination on that small face. "Mama taught me to peel them in one long ribbon," Sophie said. "See? If you can get the whole apple without breaking the peel, you can throw it over your shoulder, and it will make the shape of the letter of the name of who you're going to marry." "Is that so?" Clara smiled, rolling out the pie crust. She'd been pleased to find that Jack's kitchen was well stocked with flour, lard, and other essentials. "And what letter did yours make?" "It broke," Sophie admitted. "Papa says it's silly superstition anyway, but Mama believed in lots of things like that. She said God sends us signs all the time if we just pay attention." Clara's hand stilled on the rolling pin. "And what kind of signs do you think God sends?" Sophie looked at her with those impossibly blue eyes. "Well, like you getting off at the wrong train station. That was a sign." "Sophie, it was," the child insisted. "I prayed and prayed for God to send us someone. Papa's so sad all the time, even when he smiles. And I heard Mrs. Henderson telling Mrs. Murphy at church that Papa was going to send away for a mail-order bride, but then he never did, and I thought maybe if I just prayed hard enough—" Clara's heart stuttered. "Your father was going to send for a mail-order bride." Sophie nodded vigorously. "I saw the newspaper with the advertisements all circled, but then he threw it in the fire. That was last winter, when I had the fever real bad, and he thought I was going to die like Mama." "Oh, sweetheart," Clara said, forgetting the pie entirely and pulling Sophie into her arms. The little girl burrowed against her, and Clara could feel the thin shoulders shaking slightly. "I heard him praying," Sophie whispered. "He was begging God not to take me too. He said he couldn't bear it, and I got better, but after that he never talked about the mail-order bride again." Clara held her tighter, her mind spinning. Jack Cooper, this gruff, careful man, had considered exactly what she had done, reaching out to a stranger for companionship, for help, for something to fill the void left by loss. But he had pulled back, chosen to go it alone rather than risk his heart again. "Smells good in here." Clara jumped, releasing Sophie to find Jack standing in the doorway. He'd washed up, his hair was damp and combed back, and he'd changed into a clean shirt. The late afternoon sun backlighting him made him look younger, less careworn. "We're making apple pie," Sophie announced, seemingly recovered from her emotional moment. "Miss Clara knows how to make the crust flaky and everything." "Is that right?" Jack moved into the kitchen, and suddenly the space felt much smaller. "Well, that'll be a nice change from my attempts." "Sophie was telling me you're not much of a baker," Clara said, trying to keep her voice light despite the revelations still swirling in her mind. Jack chuckled, a low rumble that did things to Clara's insides. "That's being generous. Last time I tried to make bread, we used it as a doorstop for a month." "Papa," Sophie giggled. "It wasn't that bad." "You're right," Jack agreed solemnly. "The chickens wouldn't even eat it, so it must have been worse." They fell into an easy rhythm then, Clara finishing the pie while Jack set the table and Sophie chattered about everything from her favorite barn cat to the math lessons Jack tried to teach her in the evenings. It was so domestic, so natural, that Clara had to keep reminding herself this wasn't her life, this wasn't her family. Supper was simple: beans and cornbread that Jack had started earlier, some preserved vegetables from last year's garden, fresh milk from their cow. But sitting at that worn wooden table, listening to Sophie tell stories and watching Jack try to hide his smiles behind his coffee cup, Clara thought it might have been the best meal she'd had in years. Miss Clara, Sophie said as Clara was clearing the dishes, will you read to me tonight? Papa tries, but he doesn't do the voices. Sophie, Miss Bennet has had a long day. I'd love to, Clara interrupted. She caught Jack's surprised look and added, that is, if you don't mind. Please, Papa. Sophie turned those big eyes on her father. Jack held Clara's gaze for a moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. I don't mind, he said quietly. After the dishes were done, Jack dried while Clara washed, their hands occasionally brushing as they passed plates between them. Sophie led Clara to her room for the nightly ritual. The book was well worn, pages soft from countless readings. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Clara read from the cover. Oh, I love this one. Mama used to read it to me, Sophie said, climbing into bed. She said I was just like Alice, always curious and getting into adventures. Clara sat on the edge of the bed and began to read, doing different voices for each character. Sophie giggled at her Cheshire cat and gasped at her Queen of Hearts. In the doorway, she noticed Jack watching, his shoulder propped against the frame, that unreadable expression back on his face. When Sophie's eyes finally fluttered closed, Clara carefully extracted herself from the bed, tucking the covers around the sleeping child. Jack stepped back to let her pass into the hallway, then gently closed Sophie's door. Thank you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She hasn't fallen asleep that easy since Margaret, Clara finished. His eyes sharpened. She told you about her mother? A little. Clara hesitated, then decided on honesty. She thinks God sent me here. She saw me get off that train and thought her prayers had been answered. Jack ran a hand over his face. I'm sorry. I've tried to explain, but she's got it in her head that... He stopped, shaking his head. Would you like some coffee? Or tea? I think we might have tea somewhere. Clara knew she should say no, go to her room, maintain proper boundaries. Instead, she said, coffee would be nice. They sat on the front porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The temperature had dropped with the sun, and the evening was almost pleasant. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and another answered. This must seem very different from Philadelphia, Jack said. Clara looked at him in surprise. How did you know I was from Philadelphia? Your trunk has a railway tag from there, and your accent, definitely Eastern City, but not New York. Boston maybe, but I guessed Philadelphia. You're observant, Clara said, impressed despite herself. Have to be, out here. He took a sip of his coffee. What made you leave? If you don't mind my asking. Clara considered how much to tell him. My father died 6 months ago. Consumption. He was a bookkeeper, never made much money, but we got by. After he was gone, I got work in a textile factory, but she shrugged. 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, for barely enough to share a room with 3 other girls. When I saw the advertisement for the position in Creekstone, it seemed like a chance for something better. Employment, you said? Jack's voice was carefully neutral. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, grateful for the darkness. Yes. Must be some position to bring you all the way out here. She could feel him looking at her, but kept her own eyes fixed on the stars. It seemed like a good opportunity at the time. And now? Now I'm sitting on a porch in Dust Creek, watching the stars and drinking coffee with a stranger while my supposed employer probably thinks I've run off with his train fare. We're not really strangers anymore, Jack pointed out. You've made pie in my kitchen, read my daughter to sleep. That makes us neighbors, at least. Temporary neighbors, Clara corrected, though the word temporary sat heavy on her tongue. They sat in silence for a while, comfortable despite everything. Clara found herself stealing glances at him in the dim light from the house. He'd rolled his sleeves up, and she could see the strength in his forearms, the capable hands wrapped around his coffee cup. Sophie mentioned you'd considered, that is, she saw advertisements for mail-order brides. The words tumbled out before Clara could stop them. Jack went very still. Did she now? I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. It was last winter. His voice was flat. Sophie had scarlet fever. The doctor said she might not make it. I sat by her bed for 3 days straight, watching her burn up with fever, and I thought I can't do this alone. I can't lose her too, And even if she lives, I can't be everything she needs. Clara stayed quiet, sensing he needed to speak. So I got the newspaper from Denver, the one with the advertisements. Circled a few. Even wrote a letter to one lady, a widow from Ohio. But then Sophie's fever broke and she opened her eyes and smiled at me, and I burned the letter, burned the newspaper too. Why? Jack was quiet for so long, Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because I'm a coward, I suppose. Because losing Margaret nearly killed me, and I couldn't risk that again. Because it didn't seem fair to ask some woman to come out here, to this hard life, just because I was too weak to manage on my own. That's not weakness, Clara said softly. That's love. You were protecting your heart, and Sophie's too. Maybe. He turned to look at her then, and even in the dim light she could see the intensity in his eyes. Can I ask you something? Clara nodded. Your position in Creekstone. It's not really employment, is it? She could lie. Make up some story about being a governess or a housekeeper. But something about the darkness, about the intimacy of shared truths made her honest. No, she whispered. It's not. Jack nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer. Theodore Morrison. Saw his advertisement a few months back. Rancher, widower, looking for a wife. Clara's breath caught. You know him? Know of him. He's got a big spread, runs about 500 head of cattle. Good reputation, they say. Bit older, maybe 45 or so. His first wife died in childbirth, along with the baby. Clara absorbed this information, more than Theodore had put in his letters, which had been businesslike and brief. You must think I'm terrible, she said. Coming out here to marry a complete stranger for his money? Is that why you came? For his money? Clara thought about it. No, not just that. For a chance at something, a home, a family, a life that meant something more than just surviving another day in the factory. Nothing terrible about that, Jack said gently. We all do what we have to do to survive, and sometimes to hope for more than just survival. They sat quietly again, the night settling around them like a blanket. Somewhere an owl hooted, and the windmill creaked softly in the breeze. I should go to Creekstone tomorrow, Clara said finally. Try to explain. Roads washed out from the spring rains, Jack said. Only way there now is by train. Oh. Clara felt both disappointed and relieved. But if you want, I could send a telegram tomorrow. Let him know you were delayed. Clara considered this. Theodore Morrison waiting for a bride who couldn't even manage to get off at the right station. What would he think? What would he want with someone so incompetent? Maybe, she said. Jack stood, stretching. It's late. Morning comes early on a ranch. Clara rose too, and they stood there for a moment, closer than propriety dictated. She could smell the soap on his skin, the coffee on his breath. Her heart was doing dangerous things in her chest. Thank you, she said. For everything. The room, the work, not making me feel foolish for my mistake. We all make mistakes, Jack said. Sometimes they turn out to be the best things that happen to us. He went inside then, leaving Clara on the porch with those words echoing in her ears. She stood there a while longer, looking at the stars that seemed so much brighter here than they ever had in Philadelphia, wondering if Sophie might be right after all. Maybe God did send signs. Maybe getting off at the wrong station wasn't a mistake. Maybe it was exactly where she was supposed to be. But no, that was foolish thinking. She had an obligation to Theodore Morrison. She'd taken his money for the train fare. She'd promised to marry him. Just because Jack Cooper made her heart race and his daughter made her want things she'd never dared dream of, didn't change that. Thursday, she told herself firmly. Thursday, she would get on that train and go to her real life. These few days were just a detour, a brief respite from reality. Inside, she heard Jack moving around, probably banking the fire and checking the locks. Such simple domestic sounds, but they made her ache with longing for something she'd never really had. A home where someone waited for her, worried about her, cared whether she was warm enough, safe enough, happy enough. Stop it, she told herself. This isn't your home. They aren't your family. But as she finally went inside and made her way to the guest room, Margaret's sewing room, she'd realized from the basket of mending still in the corner, She couldn't shake the feeling that she was lying to herself. The next morning came too soon and not soon enough. Clara had barely slept, her mind churning with thoughts of Jack just across the hall, of Sophie's sweet face, of Theodore Morrison waiting in Creekstone. When she finally gave up on sleep and dressed in her simplest day dress, she could hear movement in the kitchen. Jack was already there, making coffee and what appeared to be attempts at breakfast. He looked up when she entered, and something flashed across his face. Surprise? Pleasure? It was gone before she could identify it. "You're up early," he said. "I'm used to factory hours," Clara replied, tying on the apron again. "Here, let me help." They worked in companionable silence, Clara taking over the eggs while Jack sliced bread. Their movements were coordinated without being planned, as if they'd been doing this dance for years instead of hours. "Papa!" "Miss Clara!" Sophie burst into the kitchen, still in her nightgown, hair a wild tangle. "You're both here." "Where else would we be, little bird?" Jack asked, swooping her up and settling her in her chair. "I had a dream you were gone," Sophie said to Clara, her eyes worried. "That you got on a train in the middle of the night and went away." Clara's heart clenched. She exchanged a quick glance with Jack, saw her own guilt reflected there. "I'm here," she said, smoothing Sophie's tangled hair. "Now, let's get some food in you, and then we'll tackle this bird's nest on your head." Sophie giggled, the worry disappearing from her face, but Clara caught Jack watching her with that unreadable expression again. After breakfast, Jack headed out to deal with the cattle, and Clara spent the morning teaching Sophie her letters while simultaneously attacking the pile of mending that had accumulated. Sophie was bright, eager to learn, though easily distracted by any story that popped into her head. "Mama was teaching me to read," Sophie said, carefully copying her letters on the slate. "But then she got sick, and Papa tries, but he says his hands are too big and clumsy for holding the pencil right to show me." "Your Papa does just fine," Clara said, examining a shirt that needed buttons. Jack's shirt, she realized, and had to focus very hard on threading her needle. "Miss Clara, are you going to marry that man in Creekstone?" Clara's needle slipped, pricking her finger. "Sophie!" "Well, are you? Because if you are, that's stupid. He doesn't even know you. Papa knows you. I know you. You should stay here and marry Papa instead." "Sophie Marie Cooper," Clara said, trying to sound stern despite the heat flooding her cheeks. "You can't just go around telling people to marry each other." "Why not? Mrs. Henderson says Papa needs a wife. She tried to get him to court her daughter Millicent, but Papa said he'd rather eat his own boots." Clara bit her lip to keep from laughing. "Perhaps we should focus on your letters." But Sophie wasn't easily deterred. "Do you like Papa? Your father is very nice. Do you think he's handsome?" "Mrs. Murphy says he's the handsomest man in 3 counties, even if he is a bit rough around the edges." "Sophie, I think you're beautiful. Papa does too. I can tell because he keeps looking at you when he thinks you won't notice." Clara's heart did a dangerous skip. "Let's practice writing your name." Sophie sighed dramatically but complied. They worked until noon, when Jack came in for dinner. The midday meal, Clara had learned, was called dinner here, with supper being the evening meal. He was dusty and sweaty, but he washed up at the pump before coming to the table. "How are the lessons going?" he asked, ruffling Sophie's hair. "Miss Clara says I'm very smart," Sophie reported proudly, "and she's teaching me to sew too. Look." She held up a crooked line of stitches on a piece of cloth. "That's wonderful, little bird." He looked at Clara over Sophie's head. "Thank you. I've been trying, but—" "It's my pleasure," Clara said, and meant it. She's a quick learner. "Miss Clara, can we go to the creek after dinner?" Sophie asked. "It's so hot, and you could teach me to swim properly. Papa says I splash like a wounded duck." "I did not say that," Jack protested. "You did. Last week, you said—" "If Miss Clara wants to go to the creek, that's fine," Jack interrupted. "But you have to listen to everything she says." No arguing. Sophie nodded so vigorously Clara thought her head might fall off. The creek, it turned out, was a slice of paradise in the desert landscape. Hidden behind a grove of cottonwoods, it ran clear and cool over smooth stones. There was even a small pool where the water collected, perfect for swimming. Sophie immediately stripped down to her chemise and bloomers and waded in, squealing at the cold. Clara was more hesitant, but the heat of the day and Sophie's encouragement won out. She removed her dress, grateful she'd worn her oldest petticoat and chemise. The water was shockingly cold at first, but blissfully refreshing once she adjusted. Sophie splashed and played while Clara taught her basic swimming strokes. And for a while, Clara forgot about everything else, about Theodore Morrison, about Thursday's train, about the impropriety of her situation. She didn't hear Jack approach until he cleared his throat. Clara whirled around, immediately aware of how her wet undergarments must be clinging to her. Jack stood on the bank, his hat pulled low, but she could see the way his eyes darkened as they traveled over her before he forcibly looked away. I brought towels, he said, his voice rough. Thought you might need them. Papa, come swim? Sophie called. Not now, little bird. I've got work to finish. But he didn't leave immediately. He stood there for another moment, and Clara found herself frozen, unable to move under his gaze. Water dripped from her hair down her neck, and she saw him track its path. I'll just leave these here, he said finally, setting the towels on a rock. Sophie, mind Miss Clara. He turned and strode away, and Clara released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. That evening, Clara couldn't quite meet Jack's eyes across the supper table. Every time she thought about how he'd looked at her by the creek, standing there with water dripping from her hair and her wet chemise clinging to her skin, heat flooded her cheeks. Sophie, oblivious to the tension, chattered about her swimming lesson and how Miss Clara had taught her to float on her back like a leaf on the water. And tomorrow Miss Clara says we can practice holding our breath underwater, Sophie announced, bouncing in her seat. She can hold hers for a whole minute. We counted. That's impressive, Jack said, his voice carefully neutral, though Clara caught him glancing at her before quickly returning his attention to his plate. After Sophie was in bed, another story read with all the proper voices, Clara found herself restless. The house felt too small, too warm, too full of Jack's presence. She stepped out onto the porch, hoping the evening air would clear her head. She wasn't surprised when Jack joined her a few minutes later. They seemed drawn to this spot, to these quiet moments under the stars when the day's work was done and Sophie slept peacefully inside. I should apologize, Jack said without preamble, for this afternoon. I didn't mean to. I should have announced myself sooner. It's your property, Clara said softly. You have every right to walk wherever you please. That's not... He stopped, ran a hand through his hair in what Clara was beginning to recognize as his gesture of frustration. You're a guest in my home. You deserve respect and privacy. You've been nothing but respectful, Mr. Cooper. Jack, he said, please. Mr. Cooper was my father. Jack, Clara repeated, and the name felt dangerous on her tongue, intimate in a way that Mr. Cooper wasn't. They stood there in silence, the night air heavy with things unsaid. Finally, Jack spoke again. I sent that telegram today. To Morrison. Clara's stomach dropped. Oh. What did you say? Just that you'd been delayed due to transportation issues and would arrive on Thursday's train. Kept it simple. Thank you. The words came out steadier than she felt. Thursday. 3 more days, and she'd be gone from here, married to a stranger she'd never met, living a life she'd chosen from desperation rather than desire. Is that really what you want? Jack asked suddenly. To marry a man you don't know? To spend your life with someone who placed an advertisement for a wife like he was ordering a new plow? The harsh words stung, perhaps because they voiced her own doubts. It's not about what I want. It's about survival, about having a chance at a real life. This isn't a real life? Jack gestured to the house, the ranch, the vast expanse of land under the star-filled sky. This isn't my life, Clara said firmly, though her heart ached with the words. This is your life. Yours and Sophie's. I'm just passing through. Jack turned to face her fully then, and in the moonlight she could see the intensity in his eyes. What if you didn't have to be? Clara's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying... He paused, seemed to gather himself. I'm saying that Sophie isn't the only one who noticed you got off at the wrong station. Maybe she's right. Maybe there's a reason for it. Jack, I know I have no right to ask this. You don't know me any better than you know Morrison. But Sophie already loves you, and I haven't felt this way since Margaret died. Like, maybe the world isn't just about surviving another day. Clara's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must hear it. You've known me for 2 days. Sometimes that's all it takes. Sometimes you just know. He stepped closer, and Clara found herself unable to back away. Tell me you don't feel it too. Tell me you haven't wondered what it would be like to stay. She wanted to lie, to tell him she felt nothing, that Thursday couldn't come soon enough. But the words wouldn't come, because she did feel it, this pull between them that seemed to grow stronger with every passing hour. It doesn't matter what I feel, she whispered. I made a promise to Mr. Morrison. He paid for my passage. I'll reimburse him. Every penny. It's not about the money. Then what is it about? Clara looked away, unable to bear the hope in his eyes. It's about doing the right thing, about honor and keeping one's word. Jack was quiet for a long moment. Then, even if keeping your word means being miserable, even if it means Sophie loses someone she's already coming to love, even if it means we both spend the rest of our lives wondering what might have been. Stop, Clara said, her voice breaking. Please, just stop. This isn't fair. Life isn't fair, Jack said roughly. If it were, Margaret would still be alive, and you never would have needed to answer that advertisement in the first place. But this is what we have, this moment, this choice. He reached out, his fingers gently tilting her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. Stay, he said simply. Not for Sophie, though she needs you. Not for the ranch, though God knows I could use the help. Stay for this. And then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was desperate and hungry, full of loneliness and longing, and 2 years of grief finally cracking open to let something else in. Clara's hands came up to his chest, intending to push him away. But instead she found herself clutching his shirt, pulling him closer. The kiss seemed to last forever and end too soon. When Jack pulled back, they were both breathing hard. That was... Clara couldn't finish. I'm not sorry, Jack said firmly. I won't apologize for that. Clara touched her lips, still feeling the burn of his. I should go inside. Clara! But she was already moving, fleeing, really, back into the house and to the safety of her room. She pressed her back against the closed door, her heart racing, her lips still tingling from Jack's kiss. What was she doing? She'd come here to marry Theodore Morrison, not to fall for a grieving rancher and his motherless daughter. This wasn't the plan. This wasn't what she'd agreed to. But as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, all she could think about was the desperation in Jack's kiss, the way Sophie had clung to her in the water that afternoon, the feeling of rightness that came from sitting at their dinner table. 3 more days. She just had to make it through 3 more days, and then she could get on that train and never look back. But her traitorous heart whispered, what if you don't want to leave? The next morning brought a change in the weather. Clouds had rolled in overnight, heavy and dark, promising the rain that the parched land desperately needed. Jack was already gone when Clara made her way to the kitchen, but he'd left coffee warming on the stove and a note. Taking Sophie with me to check the north pasture. Back by noon. Clara was almost grateful for the respite. After last night's kiss, she wasn't sure she could face him over breakfast and pretend everything was normal. She busied herself with household chores, washing, mending, preparing food for later. The mundane task gave her hands something to do while her mind churned. She was kneading bread dough when she heard horses approaching. Too early for Jack and Sophie to return. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the window. 2 women were dismounting in the yard, one middle-aged with sharp features and shrewd eyes, the other younger, perhaps 20, with carefully arranged blonde curls and a dress that seemed impractically fancy for ranch country. Clara's stomach sank. Visitors meant questions, meant explanations she wasn't prepared to give. The older woman knocked briskly on the door, and Clara had no choice but to answer. "Good morning," the woman said, her eyes immediately cataloging every detail of Clara's appearance. "I'm Mrs. Henderson, and this is my daughter, Millicent. We've come to call on Jack." The daughter, Millicent, who Jack had said he'd rather eat boots than court, Clara remembered with an inappropriate urge to laugh. I'm afraid Mr. Cooper is out with Sophie, Clara said politely. They won't return until noon. Mrs. Henderson's eyes narrowed. And you are? Clara Bennett. I'm helping with the household for a few days. Helping, Mrs. Henderson repeated, her tone suggesting she found this highly suspect. How generous of you. And where might you be from, Miss Bennett? Philadelphia. My, that's quite a distance to travel for temporary household help. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her voice steady. There was a misunderstanding with my travel arrangements. Mr. Cooper was kind enough to offer temporary room and board in exchange for assistance with Sophie and the house. How very convenient, Mrs. Henderson said. Well, we'll just wait for Jack to return. Millicent has brought a pie. Apple, Millicent said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was high and childish. Jack's favorite. Clara bit back the urge to say that she'd made apple pie just 2 nights ago, that she knew exactly how Jack liked it. Extra cinnamon, the crust golden brown, but not too dark. Instead, she stepped aside to let them in. The 2 women settled themselves in the parlor like they owned it. Mrs. Henderson's sharp eyes took in every detail. The clean floors, the fresh flowers Clara had picked that morning, the mending basket with Jack's shirts. You've certainly made yourself at home, Mrs. Henderson observed. I believe in earning my keep, Clara replied evenly. I'm sure you do. The older woman's tone was laden with implication. It must be quite different from Philadelphia. All this dust and isolation. I can't imagine what would bring a young woman all the way out here alone. Mother, Millicent said, a warning in her voice. You're being rude. I'm being practical, dear. It's important to know who's staying in our neighbor's home, especially with young Sophie to consider. Clara's temper flared. I assure you, Mrs. Henderson, Sophie's welfare is my primary concern. Is it? How nice. And how long exactly will you be concerning yourself with Sophie's welfare? Until Thursday. I'll be taking the train to Creekstone. Creekstone? Mrs. Henderson's eyes lit up with interest. Whatever for? Before Clara could respond, she heard Sophie's voice carrying through the window. Papa, can Miss Clara come with us to town tomorrow? Please. She needs to see the mercantile, and I want to show her the church, and— The door burst open and Sophie rushed in, stopping short when she saw the visitors. Oh. Hello, Mrs. Henderson. Millicent. Hello, Sophie, dear, Mrs. Henderson said, her tone warming considerably. How are you? I'm very well, thank you, Sophie said politely, then immediately moved to Clara's side, taking her hand. Miss Clara's been teaching me to swim and read better, and she makes the best pie. Does she now? Mrs. Henderson's eyes moved between Sophie and Clara. How wonderful. Jack appeared in the doorway, hat in hand, and Clara saw his jaw tighten when he noticed the visitors. Mrs. Henderson, Millicent, this is unexpected. We thought we'd be neighborly, Mrs. Henderson said. Millicent brought pie. That's kind of you, Jack said, though his tone suggested otherwise. His eyes found Clara's, and something in them made her pulse quicken. I see you've met Miss Bennett. Yes, she was just telling us about her temporary stay. Though Sophie seems quite attached for such a short acquaintance. Sophie pressed closer to Clara. Miss Clara's not temporary. She's going to help us get ready for the day, Jack interrupted smoothly. Sophie, why don't you go wash up? Miss Bennett, could you help her? Clara understood the dismissal and guided Sophie from the room, though she could hear Mrs. Henderson's voice as they left. Really, Jack? A strange woman in your home? What would Margaret think? Sophie's hand tightened in hers. I don't like Mrs. Henderson, she whispered. She always talks about Mama like she knew her better than Papa did. Sometimes people mean well but don't know how to show it properly, Clara said diplomatically, though privately she agreed with Sophie's assessment. They were in Sophie's room when they heard raised voices from the parlor, not quite shouting, but sharp enough to carry. Completely inappropriate, Mrs. Henderson's voice. An unmarried woman under your roof, who has been nothing but helpful and proper. Jack's voice, cold as Clara had never heard it. People will talk, Jack. You have to think of Sophie's reputation, if not your own. I am I'm thinking of Sophie. She's happier than she's been in 2 years. Because you've let her get attached to some woman who's leaving in 2 days. How is that good for her? Clara closed Sophie's door, not wanting the child to hear more, but the words echoed in her mind. Mrs. Henderson was right, wasn't she? Clara was leaving. Sophie would be hurt. She'd been selfish to allow the attachment to form. Miss Clara? Sophie's voice was small. You're not really leaving, are you? Clara knelt down, taking Sophie's hands in hers. Sweetie, I told you from the beginning, but that was before. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. Before you made pie with me and taught me to swim and read me stories with the voices. Before Papa smiled again. Before you became ours. Clara's heart shattered. Oh, Sophie, no! Sophie pulled away. You can't leave. God sent you to us. He answered my prayers. Sometimes, Clara started, but Sophie was already running from the room. Clara found her in the barn, curled up in the hayloft where she'd apparently made a little hideaway. There were treasures here, a few books, some pretty rocks, a ragged doll that must have been her mother's. Go away, Sophie said, her voice muffled. Clara climbed up anyway, settling beside the little girl. I know you're upset. Mama went away too, Sophie said. She said she'd always be with me, but she's not. She's gone. And now you're going too, and Papa will be sad again, and I'll be alone. Your Papa loves you more than anything in the world. But he's sad. He tries to hide it, but I know. He only really smiles when you're there. And last night, I saw him kiss you. Clara's breath caught. You saw it. I couldn't sleep, so I went to get water. I saw through the window. Sophie turned to look at her, tears streaming down her face. If he kissed you, doesn't that mean you're supposed to stay? In all the stories, when people kiss, they live happily ever after. Real life isn't like stories, sweetheart. Why not? Sophie demanded. Why can't it be? Why does everyone I love have to leave? Clara pulled the sobbing child into her arms, her own eyes burning with tears. She held Sophie while she cried, rocking her gently, murmuring soothing words that felt like lies. When Jack found them an hour later, after the Hendersons had finally left, Sophie had cried herself to sleep in Clara's arms. He climbed up into the loft, his face grim. I heard what happened, he said quietly. Sophie running off, upset. She saw us last night, Clara whispered, on the porch. Jack's eyes widened. She saw us. The kiss. She thinks it means I'm staying. Jack was quiet for a moment, studying his sleeping daughter. Maybe it should. Jack, I mean it, Clara. Not because of the kiss, though God knows that meant something, but because of this. He gestured to Sophie in Clara's arms. Because of how right this is. Can't you feel it? What I feel doesn't matter. It's the only thing that matters. He moved closer, careful not to wake Sophie. Clara, I know we've only known each other 3 days, but I've lived more in those 3 days than I have in the past 2 years. You've brought something back to life in this house, in Sophie, in me. You're just lonely, Clara said, though the words tasted false. Any woman would. No, Jack said firmly, not any woman. You. The way you are with Sophie, the way you've made this house feel like a home again, the way you challenge me and make me laugh, and... He stopped, frustration clear on his face. I'm not good with words. Margaret always said I was better with actions than speeches. But I'm trying to tell you that this isn't about loneliness or convenience. This is about you, Clara Bennett, and how you've turned our world upside down in the best possible way. Sophie stirred in Clara's arms, mumbling something incoherent before settling again. We should get her inside, Clara said, desperate to escape the intensity of Jack's gaze, the weight of his words. Together they managed to get Sophie into the house and into her bed without waking her. She immediately curled into her pillow, one hand reaching out as if searching for something. Clara tucked her doll under her arm, and Sophie sighed contentedly. In the hallway, Jack caught Clara's arm gently. The Hendersons were right about one thing. It's not proper, you staying here with just Sophie as chaperone. But if you were my fiancé, that would be different, more acceptable. Clara's heart stopped. What are you saying? I'm saying marry me, not Morrison. Me. Stay here, be Sophie's mother, be my wife. I know I don't have much to offer, just a ranch that barely makes ends meet, and a daughter who needs more than I can give her alone. But I promise you this, I will work every day to make you happy. I will never take you for granted. I will love you with everything I have. Jack, you don't love me. You barely know me. Then let me know you. Give us a chance. Don't get on that train Thursday. Clara pulled away, her whole body trembling. I need air. She fled to the porch. Their porch, she'd come to think of it, and wasn't that part of the problem? She'd let herself get too comfortable, too attached, too willing to pretend this was her life. The storm that had been threatening all day was closer now. Lightning flickered on the horizon, and the air was heavy with the promise of rain. Clara breathed deeply, trying to calm her racing heart. 3 days. She'd known Jack Cooper for 3 days. How could she possibly consider throwing away her plans, her agreement with Theodore Morrison, for 3 days of… what? Playing house? Pretending to be the mother Sophie needed and the wife Jack wanted? But then she thought about those 3 days. How Sophie's laugh made her heart light. How Jack's rare smiles felt like gifts. How sitting at their dinner table felt more like home than anywhere she'd lived since her father died. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first fat drops of rain began to fall. Clara didn't move, letting the drops hit her face, mixing with the tears she hadn't realized were falling. Clara. She turned to find Jack in the doorway, silhouetted against the warm light from inside the house. The storm's getting worse. You should come in. In a minute. He stepped out onto the porch, moving to stand beside her but not touching. They watched the rain begin in earnest, turning the dusty yard into mud. The land needed this, Jack said quietly. Been too dry for too long. Clara understood he wasn't just talking about the ranch. I'm scared, she admitted, the words barely audible over the rain. Of what? Of wanting this too much. Of making another mistake. Of hurting Sophie. Of being hurt myself. Jack turned to her then, and in a flash of lightning she saw his face clearly, the vulnerability there, the hope, the fear that matched her own. I'm scared too, he said. Scared of loving again, of losing again. But I'm more scared of letting you walk away, of spending the rest of my life wondering what if. The rain was coming harder now, blowing onto the porch, soaking them both. Neither moved. Ask me again, Clara said suddenly. What? Ask me again, to stay, to marry you. Ask me again. Jack stepped closer, rain dripping from his hair, his eyes never leaving hers. Clara Bennett, will you marry me? Will you stay here and be my wife? Be Sophie's mother? Will you take a chance on a life that won't be easy but will be real and honest and full of love? Clara thought about Theodore Morrison, waiting in Creekstone, about the obligation she felt to him, a stranger who'd paid her way, about the life she'd planned, safe and respectable and empty. Then she thought about Sophie's arms around her neck, about Jack's kiss in the darkness, about the way this house had felt like home from the moment she'd walked in. I need to think, she said, her voice breaking. But her words were cut off by a crash of thunder so loud it shook the house. Sophie's scream from inside sent them both running. They found her sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face, arms reaching out. Mama! She cried, still half asleep. Mama, where are you? Clara didn't hesitate. She gathered Sophie into her arms, holding her close, murmuring soothing words. It's okay, sweetheart. It's just thunder. You're safe. Sophie's arms went around her neck, clinging tight. Don't leave, she sobbed. Please don't leave. Everyone leaves. Clara looked over Sophie's head at Jack, saw her own heart breaking reflected in his eyes. How could she leave this child who needed her? How could she leave this man who was offering her everything she'd never dared dream of? But how could she stay, knowing she was breaking a promise, disappointing a man who was counting on her? The storm raged outside, and Clara held Sophie tighter, her mind spinning with impossible choices. Tomorrow was Wednesday. One more day until Thursday's train. One more day to decide the rest of her life. Sophie eventually fell back asleep, but only after Clara promised to stay with her. She sat in the chair by Sophie's bed, watching the little girl sleep, listening to the storm gradually pass over. Jack had retreated to his own room after pressing a gentle kiss to Sophie's forehead and giving Clara a look that said everything and nothing. As dawn approached, the storm having washed the world clean, Clara made her decision. She couldn't leave Sophie. She couldn't leave Jack. But she couldn't simply disappear on Theodore Morrison either. She had to go to Creekstone, explain in person, return his money. It was the only honorable thing to do. She'd take Thursday's train as planned, but only to set things right. Then she'd come back, if Jack would still have her after she'd left, even temporarily. When morning came properly, she found Jack already in the kitchen, looking haggard, like he hadn't slept at all. "I've decided," she said without preamble. His whole body tensed. "And?" "I need to go to Creekstone. To explain to Mr. Morrison in person, to return his money. It's the right thing to do." Jack's face fell, but he nodded slowly. "I understand. You're an honorable woman. It's one of the things I—" He stopped, turned away. "Will you come back?" "If you'll have me." He whirled around, hope blazing in his eyes. "If I'll— Clara, I'll wait forever if I have to. It won't be forever. Just a day, maybe two. Long enough to make things right. And then? Then I come home," Clara said, the word home feeling right on her tongue. Jack crossed the kitchen in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms. This kiss was different from the first, less desperate, more promise. When they pulled apart, both were breathless. "Sophie's going to be devastated when you leave," he said. "I'll explain it to her. Make her understand I'm coming back." But when Sophie woke and Clara tried to explain, the little girl just shook her head. "You're leaving," she said flatly. "Just like everyone else." "I'm coming back, Sophie. I promise." Mama promised she wouldn't leave too. Clara's heart broke. "This is different. I'm going to talk to someone and then come right back. 2 days at most." Sophie turned away, burying her face in her pillow. "Go away." Clara looked helplessly at Jack, who gathered his daughter into his arms. "Little bird, Miss Clara has to do something important, but she promised to come back, and Clara doesn't break her promises." "How do you know?" Sophie demanded. "Because I trust her," Jack said simply. "And you should too." Sophie peeked out at Clara. "You promise? Really, truly promise?" "I promise," Clara said. "Cross my heart." "And hope to die?" "Sophie," Jack said, but Clara finished the childhood vow. "And hope to die." Sophie considered this, then launched herself into Clara's arms. 2 days. That's all. Then you come home." "Then I come home," Clara agreed. The rest of the day passed too quickly. Clara helped Sophie with her lessons, made bread for them to eat while she was gone, mended the last of Jack's shirts, normal domestic things that felt weighted with significance. That evening, their last evening, Jack asked her to walk with him after Sophie was asleep. They strolled toward the creek, the ground still soft from yesterday's rain. "I have something for you," Jack said, pulling a small object from his pocket. It was a ring, simple silver, with a small blue stone. "It was my mother's. Not fancy, but I'd like you to have it. To remember you have something to come back to." Clara's eyes filled with tears as he slipped it onto her right hand. "I could never forget." They stood by the creek, watching the stars reflect in the water. Jack told her about his plans for the ranch, about the horses he wanted to breed, the improvements he wanted to make to the house. Clara told him about her childhood, about her dreams of having a real family, about the fear that had driven her to answer Morrison's advertisement. "I was so desperate not to end up alone," she admitted. "And now you'll never be alone again," Jack promised. "You'll have Sophie and me, and God willing, more children. This ranch will be full of life and laughter again." Clara leaned against him, feeling the solid strength of him, the safety she'd never known she was looking for until she found it. "I should go back," she said eventually. "Early train tomorrow." Jack walked her back to the house, to her bedroom door. "Clara," he said, then seemed to lose words. Instead, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her gently. "Come back to us." "Always," she whispered. But as she packed her few belongings that night, Clara couldn't shake a feeling of dread. What if Theodore Morrison wouldn't release her from their agreement? What if he demanded she fulfill her promise? What if something happened, And she couldn't come back? She fingered the ring Jack had given her, drawing strength from it. Number. She would make Morrison understand. She would come back. She had to. Because somewhere between stepping off the wrong train and falling asleep to the sound of desert rain, Clara Bennett had found her home. And nothing, not obligation, not propriety, not even her own fears, would keep her from it. Tomorrow she would leave. But in 2 days, she would return. She had to believe that. She had to. The morning came too soon, bringing with it a sense of finality that made Clara's chest tight with anxiety. She dressed carefully in her traveling dress, the same navy blue she'd worn when she'd arrived just 4 days ago, though it felt like a lifetime had passed since then. Her fingers trembled as she pinned her hair, and she had to stop twice to wipe away tears that threatened to fall. Sophie was already at the breakfast table when Clara emerged, her face pale and drawn, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she'd slept as poorly as Clara had. The little girl didn't speak, didn't even look up from her untouched plate of eggs and biscuit. "Good morning, sweetheart," Clara said softly. Sophie's only response was to push her food around with her fork. Jack stood by the stove, his back rigid with tension. "Coffee's ready," he said without turning around, "and I packed some food for your journey." The normalcy of his words, the careful control in his voice, made Clara want to cry. She wanted him to rage, to demand she stay, to make this easier by making it impossible. But he wouldn't. He was letting her go because he respected her need to handle things properly, and somehow that made leaving even harder. "Thank you," she managed. They ate in silence, or rather, Clara and Jack pretended to eat while Sophie continued to stare at her plate. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly, counting down the minutes until they'd have to leave for town. "I don't want to go to town," Sophie said suddenly, her voice small and flat. "I don't want to watch you leave." "Sophie," Jack began, but the little girl pushed back from the table and ran to her room, slamming the door behind her. Clara started to rise, but Jack stopped her with a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Let me," he said. She could hear their muffled voices from Sophie's room, Jack's low rumble and Sophie's higher protests, punctuated by sobs. When they emerged 15 minutes later, Sophie's face was blotchy and her eyes were red, but she was dressed and holding her father's hand. "I'll come to the station," she said to Clara, not quite meeting her eyes. "But only because Papa says it's the right thing to do." The ride to town was excruciating. Sophie sat between them on the wagon bench, her small body rigid, refusing Clara's attempts to take her hand. Jack kept his eyes on the road, his jaw clenched so tight Clara worried he might crack a tooth. The landscape that had seemed so full of promise just days ago now felt barren and hostile, as if it too was rejecting her for leaving. They arrived at the station with 20 minutes to spare before the train. Jack secured the horses while Clara purchased her ticket to Creekstone, the transaction feeling like a betrayal with every coin she placed on the counter. "Visiting family?" the station master asked cheerfully. "Something like that," Clara murmured, unable to explain that she was going to break an engagement to a man she'd never met so she could return to marry a man she'd known for 4 days. On the platform, Sophie finally broke her silence. "You still have the ring Papa gave you?" Clara showed her the silver band on her right hand. "See? I'm keeping it safe." "That means you belong to us now," Sophie said fiercely, "even if you're going away. That ring means you're ours." "Yes," Clara agreed, her throat tight. "I'm yours." The whistle of the approaching train split the air, and Sophie threw herself at Clara, wrapping her arms around her waist with desperate strength. 2 days, she said against Clara's dress. "You promised." 2 days. 2 days, Clara confirmed, holding the child tight. Jack gently pried Sophie away as the train pulled into the station with a screech of brakes and a cloud of steam. He handed Clara her carpet bag, his fingers brushing hers in the exchange. "Be careful," he said quietly. "Morrison? I've heard he can be stubborn when he doesn't get his way." "I can handle Mr. Morrison," Clara said with more confidence than she felt. "I know you can." He touched her cheek briefly, a gesture so tender it nearly undid her resolve. "We'll be waiting." Clara boarded the train, finding a seat by the window where she could see them on the platform. Sophie was crying openly now, her face buried in Jack's shirt. Jack stood tall and still, one hand on his daughter's head, the other raised in farewell. As the train pulled away, Clara pressed her palm against the window, watching them grow smaller and smaller until they were just specks on the platform, then nothing at all. Only then did she allow her own tears to fall. The journey to Creekstone took 3 hours, though it felt like 3 days. Clara tried to organize her thoughts, to plan what she would say to Theodore Morrison. She'd rehearsed it 12 times in her head. How she would apologize for the inconvenience, return his money, explain that circumstances had changed. She wouldn't mention Jack and Sophie. That seemed too personal, too much like rubbing salt in the wound of rejection. The landscape outside the window gradually changed from the familiar environs of Dust Creek to something more prosperous. The ranches were larger here, the cattle more numerous, the houses grander. By the time the train pulled into Creekstone, Clara could see why Theodore Morrison had chosen to advertise for a bride. This was a town that prided itself on prosperity and respectability. A successful rancher would need a wife to maintain his social standing. The station at Creekstone was indeed grander than Dust Creek's simple platform. It was painted pristine white with green trim, and there were actually flowers in window boxes. Clara disembarked, her legs shaky from more than just the train journey. She had Morrison's address from his letters, and the station master directed her to hire a buggy from the livery stable. "The Morrison place is about 5 miles north," he said, eyeing her with curiosity. "Big spread, one of the most successful in the county." The drive gave Clara too much time to think. What if Morrison refused to accept her rejection? What if he insisted she honor their agreement? She touched Jack's ring for reassurance, reminding herself that she was doing the right thing, the honorable thing. The Morrison Ranch, when it came into view, took her breath away. The house was enormous, 2 stories of pristine white with black shutters and a wraparound porch that made Jack's humble home look like a shack in comparison. There were multiple barns, what appeared to be a separate bunkhouse for ranch hands, and cattle as far as the eye could see. Clara paid the buggy driver and asked him to wait, approaching the front door with her heart hammering in her chest. A Mexican woman in a maid's uniform answered her knock. "I'm here to see Mr. Morrison," Clara said. "I'm Clara Bennett. He's expecting me." The maid's eyes widened with recognition. "See, yes, Miss Bennett. Mr. Morrison, he has been very worried. Come, come." Clara was ushered into a parlor that was larger than Jack's entire main room. Everything was expensive and pristine, velvet curtains, oriental rugs, furniture that looked like it had never been truly used. It was beautiful and cold and nothing like the warm, lived-in comfort of Jack's home. "Miss Bennett." Clara turned to find a man in the doorway, and her first thought was that Theodore Morrison was nothing like she'd imagined. He was indeed older, 45 or perhaps 50, but he was handsome in a severe way, with silver at his temples and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in every detail of her appearance. He was impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Clara had ever made in a year at the factory. "Mr. Morrison," she said, dropping a small curtsy out of habit. "You're late," he said without preamble. 4 days late. I trust you have an explanation?" His tone was cold, businesslike, and Clara felt her spine stiffen. "I apologize for the delay. There was confusion with the train stations. I accidentally disembarked at Dust Creek instead of Creekstone. And it took you 4 days to correct this error?" His eyebrow raised skeptically. "The train to Creekstone only runs once a week," Clara explained, though she felt like a child being scolded by a schoolmaster. Morrison moved into the room, circling her slowly, and Clara had the uncomfortable feeling of being livestock evaluated for purchase. "You're prettier than your photograph suggested," he said finally. "That's good. A man in my position needs a wife who can represent him properly in society." "Mr. Morrison, I need to—" "We'll marry on Saturday," he interrupted. "I've already made arrangements with Reverend Pike. The announcement will be in Sunday's paper. I've had Mrs. Martinez prepare a room for you. You'll find it satisfactory, I think. Tomorrow we'll go to town and purchase you a proper wardrobe. That dress is entirely unsuitable for a woman of your new position." Clara felt like she was drowning. "Mr. Morrison, please, I need to speak with you." "There will be time to talk later," he said dismissively. "First, you need to get settled. I assume you understand what's expected of you? You'll manage the household, host social functions as required, and provide me with heirs. I have 2,000 head of cattle and substantial holdings. My children will inherit an empire." Children. Clara thought of Sophie, of the way she'd clung to her at the station, of other children that might come, children with Jack's green gold eyes and stubborn chin. Not this man's children, never this man's children. "I can't marry you," she said, the words coming out in a rush. Morrison went very still. "I beg your pardon?" "I can't marry you," Clara repeated, stronger now. "I'm very sorry for the inconvenience, and I've brought the money to reimburse you for the train fare, but I cannot go through with this arrangement." His face darkened, and Clara took an involuntary step back. "You signed a contract, Miss Bennet." "A contract?" Clara's voice wavered. "There was no contract. Only letters of agreement, which constitute a binding agreement." Morrison moved to a desk and pulled out a folder. "Your letters clearly state your intention to marry me in exchange for passage to Creekstone. That is a legal contract." Clara's mind raced. Could that be true? Could letters be considered legally binding? She didn't know enough about law to argue. "Even so, I cannot marry you. I don't love you." Morrison laughed, a cold sound that made her skin crawl. "Love? My dear girl, I didn't advertise for love. I advertised for a wife. Love is a luxury for people who can afford to be impractical. You clearly couldn't afford it when you answered my advertisement." "Things have changed." "Nothing has changed," Morrison cut her off. "You are a penniless woman from Philadelphia who needed a husband to survive. I am a wealthy rancher who needs a wife for respectability and heirs. It's a business arrangement, nothing more." "Then consider the arrangement dissolved," Clara said, reaching into her bag for the money she'd brought. "Here's the fare you sent." Morrison's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with surprising strength. "You think you can simply walk away? After I've told everyone in town my bride was arriving? After I've made arrangements, paid for a wedding, prepared my home? You've humiliated me, Miss Bennet." "Let go of me," Clara said, trying to pull free. "There's another man, isn't there?" Morrison's grip tightened painfully. "You stayed in Dust Creek for 4 days. Did you spread your legs for some cowboy who promised you pretty words?" The crude accusation made Clara's temper flare. "How dare you? How dare I? You're the one breaking your word, violating our agreement. Tell me, does he know you're used goods now? Damaged merchandise?" Clara wrenched her arm free and slapped him hard across the face. The crack echoed in the pristine parlor, and Morrison's eyes blazed with fury. "You'll regret that," he said quietly, dangerously. "You think you can go back to him, whoever he is? I'll ruin him. I'll find out who took what was mine, and I'll destroy him. I have influence in this territory, Miss Bennet. Money buys many things, including revenge." "I'm not your property," Clara said, though fear was creeping up her spine. "And you can't force me to marry you." "Can't I?" Morrison smiled coldly. "You're alone here, no family, no connections. Who's going to stop me? The sheriff? He's my cousin. The judge? I helped finance his election. Face facts, Miss Bennet. You came here to be my wife, and my wife you'll be, one way or another." Clara backed toward the door, but Morrison moved faster, blocking her exit. "You're not leaving this house," he said. "Maria!" "Show Miss Bennet to her room." The maid appeared, looking uncomfortable. "Senor Morrison, lock her in if necessary," Morrison ordered. "She's overwrought from travel. She needs rest. By Saturday, she'll see reason." "You can't keep me prisoner," Clara protested. "I'm not keeping you prisoner," Morrison said smoothly. "I'm protecting my investment. You'll thank me once you've had time to think clearly." Clara tried to push past him, but he was stronger, and the maid reluctantly took her arm. "Please, miss," Maria whispered, "don't make trouble. It will be worse if you fight." Clara found herself being led upstairs to a bedroom that was as cold and perfect as the rest of the house. The moment she was inside, she heard the key turn in the lock. She ran to the window, but it was a straight drop of 2 stories to the ground below. Even if she could manage to climb out, she'd likely break her leg in the fall. Panic rose in her throat. Jack had warned her Morrison might be difficult, but she'd never imagined this. She was trapped, a prisoner, and no one knew where she was except the buggy driver who was probably long gone by now. She paced the room, her mind racing. There had to be a way out. She couldn't let Morrison force her into marriage. She had to get back to Jack and Sophie. They were waiting for her. 2 days, she'd promised. 2 days. Night fell and Maria brought her a tray of food that Clara couldn't eat. Please, Clara begged, you have to help me. This is kidnapping. Maria shook her head sadly. Senor Morrison, he is powerful man. No one crosses him. Better you accept. He is not bad man, just determined. He's holding me against my will. Many wives are unhappy at first, Maria said philosophically. In time, you adjust. Clara wanted to scream. This couldn't be happening. She'd come here to do the right thing, and now she was trapped in a nightmare. She didn't sleep that night, instead sitting by the window, watching the stars and thinking of Jack and Sophie. Were they watching the same stars? Were they wondering why she hadn't sent word? Sophie would think she'd abandoned them. Jack would think she'd chosen Morrison's wealth over their love. The thought nearly broke her. Morning brought Morrison, impeccably dressed and acting as if yesterday's confrontation had never happened. I trust you've had time to reconsider your rash behavior, he said pleasantly. I want to leave, Clara said firmly. That's not an option. He set a box on the bed. Your wedding dress. I had it made weeks ago based on the measurements you sent. We'll marry tomorrow as planned. I won't say I do. Morrison's smile was chilling. You will. Because if you don't, I'll make sure your cowboy in Dust Creek loses everything. His ranch, his daughter, everything. I have that power, Miss Bennett. Don't test me. You don't even know who... Jack Cooper, Morrison said, and Clara's heart stopped. Oh yes, I know all about him. I had someone check after you mentioned Dust Creek. Widower, struggling rancher, one daughter, behind on his mortgage payments to the bank. It would be so easy to call in that loan, force a sale. And that little girl of his, well, a single father who can't provide for his child might find himself deemed unfit by the courts. You wouldn't, Clara breathed. I would do whatever necessary to get what I want. And I want you, Miss Bennett. You're young, healthy, beautiful enough. You'll give me sons and look good on my arm at social functions. That's all I require. Clara sank onto the bed, defeat washing over her. She couldn't let Jack and Sophie suffer because of her. Maybe she could find a way to escape after the marriage, get word to Jack somehow, make him understand she hadn't chosen this. But even as she thought it, she knew it was hopeless. Once she was Morrison's wife, she'd be his property in the eyes of the law. She'd never escape. I'll need time to prepare, she said dully. Morrison smiled triumphantly. Maria will help you. The ceremony is at 2 o'clock tomorrow. Don't embarrass me, Miss Bennett. The consequences would be unfortunate. He left, and Clara buried her face in her hands. She'd failed. She'd promised Sophie 2 days, and she'd failed. Jack would wait and wait, and she'd never come home. Home. That little ranch in Dust Creek had become home in just 4 days, and now she'd never see it again. Maria returned with bathwater and began laying out the wedding dress. It was beautiful, ivory silk with pearl buttons and delicate lace. The kind of dress Clara might have dreamed about once, before she knew what real love felt like. Is there no one who might help me? Clara asked desperately. Anyone in town who might stand up to Morrison? Maria hesitated, then shook her head. Senor Morrison owns much of the town, one way or another. The bank, the newspaper, even the church. Reverend Pike. He knows Morrison's ways, but he stays quiet for the sake of his congregation. Morrison funds the church, you see. Clara felt hope die in her chest. She was alone, truly alone. And tomorrow she would become Mrs. Theodore Morrison, trapped forever in this cold, beautiful prison. That night she sat at the window again, twisting Jack's ring on her finger. She thought about throwing herself from the window, better to die than live this lie. But then she thought of Sophie, already having lost one mother. She couldn't do that to the little girl, even if Sophie never knew what had happened to her. She must have dozed because she woke to the sound of pebbles hitting her window. Her heart leaped. Jack? But when she looked down, she saw Maria in the garden below, gesturing urgently. Clara tried to open the window, found it locked, but Maria held up a key, miming unlocking. Then she pointed to the door and held up 2 fingers. 2 minutes? Clara flew to the door, pressing her ear against it. She heard footsteps, a key turning, and then Maria slipped inside. Quickly, the woman whispered. Senor Morrison is away on business until morning. We must go now. Why are you helping me? Because I have daughter too, Maria said simply, and because love should not be caged. Come. They crept through the dark house, Maria leading her through servants' passages Clara hadn't known existed. At the back door, Maria pressed a small bag into her hands. "Money for the train," she whispered, "and food." "There is freight train that comes through at midnight, doesn't stop at the station but slows for the water tower. You can jump on there. Maria, if he finds out you helped me, I will be gone too. I have family in Mexico." Maria squeezed her hands. "Go now." "Run. Don't look back." Clara ran. Through the darkness, across fields, following the railroad tracks by moonlight. Her dress caught on bushes, tore on fence posts, but she didn't stop. She could hear the train coming, see its light in the distance. As it slowed for the water tower, Clara ran alongside, her carpetbag clutched in one hand. The freight car door was open, and she threw her bag in, then grabbed the edge and hauled herself up, sprawling on the floor of the car as the train picked up speed. She lay there gasping, hardly believing she'd made it. But as the train carried her away from Creekstone, she realized she had no idea where it was going. It might not even go through Dust Creek. She might end up further from Jack and Sophie than ever. But at least she was free. At least she hadn't become Morrison's prisoner bride. Whatever happened now, she would face it on her own terms. The train rumbled through the night, and Clara huddled in the corner of the freight car, shivering from cold and fear and adrenaline. She thought of Jack and Sophie, probably asleep in their beds, not knowing she was trying desperately to return to them. "I'm coming home," she whispered to the darkness. "I promise, I'm coming home." Dawn was breaking when the train finally began to slow. Clara peered out the door and nearly cried with relief. She recognized the landscape. They were approaching Dust Creek. The freight train didn't stop at the station, but it slowed enough as it passed through town that Clara could jump. She hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact, her carpetbag flying from her hands. For a moment she lay there, winded and bruised, hardly believing she'd made it. Then she was up and running, leaving her bag behind, not caring about anything but getting to the ranch. Her torn dress flapped around her legs. Her hair had come completely undone, and she probably looked like a madwoman, but she didn't care. 3 miles had never seemed so far. By the time the ranch came into view, the sun was fully up, and Clara was gasping for breath, a stitch in her side making each step agony. She saw them on the porch, Jack standing with his coffee, Sophie in her nightgown beside him. They were facing away, looking out toward the road to town, waiting for her. "Jack!" Clara called, but her voice came out as barely a whisper, her throat too dry. She tried again, louder. "Jack!" "Sophie!" Sophie turned first, and Clara saw her eyes widen in disbelief. Then the little girl was running, flying across the yard in her bare feet, crying, "Miss Clara! Miss Clara!" Clara fell to her knees just as Sophie reached her, gathering the child into her arms, both of them crying and laughing at once. "You came back!" Sophie sobbed. "You came back!" "I knew you would. I told Papa you'd come back." Jack was there then, dropping to his knees beside them, his hands framing Clara's face, his eyes searching hers with desperate intensity. "Clara? How—" "Morrison." "I couldn't," Clara gasped out between sobs. "I couldn't marry him. He tried to force me, locked me in, but Maria helped me escape, and I jumped on a freight train, and I didn't know if it would come here, but it did, and I'm home, Jack. I'm home." "You jumped on a freight train?" Jack's voice was a mix of awe and horror. "Clara, you could have been killed." "I had to get back," Clara said. "I promised. 2 days. I promised." Jack pulled both her and Sophie into his arms, and Clara felt something broken inside her finally heal. This was where she belonged. This was her family. "Marry me," Jack said against her hair. "Today. Now. I don't want to wait another day." "We can't get married today?" Clara laughed through her tears. "I look like I've been dragged through a hedge backward." "You look beautiful," Jack said fiercely. "You look like you fought your way home to us." "Papa's right," Sophie said, pulling back to look at Clara with shining eyes. "You're the most beautiful lady in the whole world. And you're ours now, forever and always." "Forever and always," Clara agreed, touching the ring on her finger, the one that had helped her find strength when she thought all was lost. They helped her to the house, Jack supporting her on one side, Sophie chattering excitedly on the other. Clara was exhausted, bruised, her dress destroyed, her reputation likely in tatters once Morrison told his version of events. But she was home. As Jack helped her to a chair and Sophie ran to get water and bandages for her scraped hands, Clara looked around the simple, warm kitchen and felt peace settle into her bones. This was worth fighting for. This was worth everything. Morrison might come after us, she warned Jack. He threatened to call in your mortgage to say you're unfit to raise Sophie. Jack's jaw tightened. Let him try. I'll fight him every step of the way. You're not going back there, Clara. Never. I don't want to bring trouble to your door. You brought life to our door, Jack interrupted. Sophie and I were just existing before you came. Now we're living again. That's worth any trouble Morrison might cause. Sophie returned with supplies and a clean dress of her mother's. This was Mama's favorite, she said, offering it to Clara. I think she'd want you to have it. Clara's eyes filled with fresh tears. Are you sure, sweetheart? Sophie nodded solemnly. Mama would be happy that Papa's not sad anymore, that I have someone to braid my hair and read me stories. She'd like you, Miss Clara. I know she would. As Clara changed into Margaret's dress, a simple blue cotton that fit surprisingly well, she thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought her here. If she hadn't gotten off at the wrong station, if Morrison hadn't shown his true colors, if Maria hadn't helped her escape. But maybe Sophie had been right all along. Maybe God had been answering prayers, just not in the way anyone expected. Clara? Jack called through the door. There's someone here! Clara's heart jumped to her throat. Morrison? Already? But when she emerged, she found Reverend Williams from the Dust Creek Church standing in the parlor, hat in hand. Miss Bennett, he said warmly, Jack tells me you two want to get married, today, if possible. Clara looked at Jack in surprise. How did you... I rode to town while you were changing, Jack admitted. Reverend Williams was kind enough to come right away. But we don't have witnesses, Clara said. We need witnesses for it to be legal. That would be us, Mrs. Henderson said from the doorway, her daughter Millicent behind her. Both women looked somewhat shamefaced. Mrs. Henderson? Jack said, clearly as surprised as Clara. I owe you an apology, the older woman said to Clara. Both of you, I was unkind. But Sophie found us this morning, told us the whole story about you going to Creekstone to do the right thing, about that horrible Morrison trying to force you. Any woman who'd jump on a freight train to keep a promise to a child is someone I'd be proud to call a neighbor. And friend, Millicent added shyly, if you'll have us. Clara felt overwhelmed. Yes, of course. Then let's have a wedding, Reverend Williams said cheerfully. It was nothing like the elaborate ceremony Morrison had planned. Clara wore Margaret's simple dress and Jack's mother's ring. Jack hadn't even shaved properly in his hurry to fetch the Reverend. Sophie stood between them as unofficial maid of honor, beaming so brightly she seemed to glow. But when Jack took Clara's hands in his and promised to love, honor, and cherish her, when Clara looked into his green-gold eyes and vowed to stand by him through whatever came, when Sophie wrapped her arms around both of them as Reverend Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Clara knew it was perfect. Can I call you Mama now? Sophie whispered during their first kiss as husband and wife. Clara pulled back from Jack to look down at the little girl who'd seen what everyone else had missed, that sometimes getting off at the wrong station was exactly the right thing to do. I would be honored, Clara said. Mama, Sophie said, testing the word, then louder, with joy. Mama! Mrs. Henderson wiped at her eyes while Millicent sighed romantically. Reverend Williams beamed at them all. I believe this calls for a celebration, Mrs. Henderson declared. Millicent, go home and fetch that cake we made yesterday. I'll make coffee. As the women bustled about preparing an impromptu wedding breakfast, Jack pulled Clara aside. Are you sure? He asked quietly. This isn't the wedding you probably dreamed of. We could have waited, done it properly. Clara silenced him with a kiss. This is exactly what I dreamed of, she said. A real family, a real home, real love. You've given me everything, Jack Cooper. Jack, someone shouted from outside. Jack Cooper! I know you're in there. Clara's blood turned cold. She recognized that voice. Theodore Morrison stood in their yard, his expensive suit dusty from travel, his face twisted with rage. Behind him were two men who looked like hired guns. Jack stepped out onto the porch, Clara and the others behind him. "Morrison, you're on my property. I'll ask you to leave." "Not without what's mine," Morrison snarled, pointing at Clara. "She signed a contract. She belongs to me." "She's my wife," Jack said calmly. "We were just married. Legally. With witnesses." Morrison's face went purple. "That's impossible. She was in my house last night. And she left of her own free will," Jack said. "Now get off my land." "I'll ruin you," Morrison threatened. "I'll call in your mortgage. I'll take your ranch, your daughter." "No," a new voice said. "You won't." Everyone turned to see the sheriff from Creekstone riding up, with Maria on a horse beside him. "Maria," Clara exclaimed. The Mexican woman smiled. "I went to the sheriff after you left, Miss Clara. Told him everything. How Senor Morrison locked you up, threatened you, tried to force marriage." "That's a lie," Morrison shouted. "It's the truth," the sheriff said, dismounting, "and I've been looking the other way for too long, cousin or not. Theodore Morrison, you're under arrest for false imprisonment and attempted forced marriage." "You can't arrest me. I own half that town." "Not anymore," the sheriff said grimly. "News of what you tried to do has spread. The bank's calling in your loans. Seems you've been overextended for a while, using intimidation to keep people quiet. Without that fear, well, your empire's crumbling." Morrison lunged at Clara, but Jack was faster, his fist connecting with Morrison's jaw with a satisfying crack. Morrison went down hard and stayed down. "That's for threatening my family," Jack said, shaking out his hand. The sheriff hauled Morrison to his feet, cuffing him. "You'll be facing charges in Creekstone. And I suspect Mrs. Cooper won't be the only one speaking against you." As Morrison was led away, still shouting threats that everyone ignored, Maria approached Clara. "I'm sorry I couldn't help sooner," she said. Clara embraced her. "You saved me." "You risked everything," Maria smiled. "Love is worth the risk, no? And now I think I stay in Dust Creek is nice town. Maybe I open bakery." "That's a wonderful idea," Mrs. Henderson said. "I'll be your first customer." As the crowd dispersed, leaving the new family alone, Clara stood between Jack and Sophie on their porch, looking out at the land that was now her home. "It's not the wrong station anymore," Sophie said, as if reading her thoughts. "It's the right station. The perfect station." "Yes," Clara agreed, feeling Jack's arm come around her waist, Sophie's hand in hers. "It's perfect." 3 months later, Clara stood in the same spot, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Her hand rested on her still flat stomach where Jack's child grew, a secret she'd share with him tonight. Sophie was in the yard trying to teach one of the barn kittens to walk on a leash, giggling when it refused to cooperate. Jack was coming in from the fields, his silhouette dark against the bright sky. The ranch was doing better now. With Morrison's fall from power, several of his former victims had come forward to help Jack, and the mortgage was secure. They'd even been able to buy a few more head of cattle. But more than that, the house was alive again. There was laughter at every meal, stories every night, love in every corner. Margaret's flowers bloomed brighter than ever, as if giving their blessing to the new family that had formed in her absence. "Mama," Sophie called. "Look!" Mr. Whiskers finally walked 3 whole steps. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Clara called back. Jack reached the porch, dusty and tired, but smiling. He kissed Clara hello, a habit that still made her heart flutter. "Good day?" he asked. "Perfect day," Clara replied. "I have something to tell you." His eyebrows rose. "Oh." Clara took his hand, placed it on her stomach. "We're going to need to add another room to the house." Jack's eyes widened with understanding, then joy blazed across his face. He picked her up, spinning her around while Sophie laughed, and asked what was happening. "You're going to be a big sister," Jack told her. Sophie's squeal of delight could probably be heard in Creekstone. That night, as they lay in bed, Jack's hand protective over her stomach, Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here. One wrong train station, one persistent little girl who believed in answered prayers, One man brave enough to offer his broken heart again. "What are you thinking?" Jack asked. "I'm thinking that Sophie was right all along," Clara said. "God did answer her prayers, just not the way any of us expected." Jack pulled her closer. "Remind me to thank him for bad map reading and torn train schedules." Clara laughed, the sound filling the darkness with joy. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, the same stars she'd watched from Theodore Morrison's prison when she'd thought all was lost. Now they watched over her true home, her real family, her unexpected happily ever after. Sometimes the wrong station was exactly the right destination. Sometimes mistakes were miracles in disguise. And sometimes a little girl's faith could see what adults were too afraid to believe, that love was just waiting for someone brave enough to get off at the wrong stop and find where they truly belonged. The months that followed brought changes Clara could never have imagined when she'd first stepped off that train in dusty boots and a travel-worn dress. Her belly grew rounder with each passing week, and Sophie took to talking to the baby every night, telling stories about all the adventures they would have together. Jack's hands had grown gentle in new ways, steadying Clara when she felt dizzy, rubbing her back when it ached, his eyes soft with wonder every time the baby kicked. It was a Tuesday morning in late spring when everything changed again. Clara was hanging laundry, Sophie helping by handing her clothespins, when a fancy carriage appeared on the road. Not the worn buckboards common in Dust Creek, but a proper carriage with matched horses and a uniformed driver. "Mama, who's that?" Sophie asked, shading her eyes against the sun. Clara's hand went protectively to her swollen belly. After Morrison's arrest and subsequent ruin, she'd thought they were done with unexpected visitors bringing trouble. But here was another reminder that the past had long fingers. The carriage stopped in front of the house, and a woman descended, elderly but elegant, with silver hair pinned in an elaborate style and clothes that whispered of Eastern money. She looked around the modest ranch with an expression Clara couldn't read. Then her eyes fell on Clara herself. "My goodness," the woman breathed. "You look just like her." "I'm sorry?" Clara said, confused. "I think you must have the wrong house." "You're Clara Bennett. Clara Cooper now, I believe." Clara nodded slowly, one hand still protective over her belly. "Yes, but how do you—" "I'm Eleanor Whitfield," the woman said. "Your grandmother." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. "That's impossible. My grandmother died before I was born. My father said—" "Your father said many things that weren't true," Eleanor interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "May I come in?" "We have much to discuss." Sophie looked between them with wide eyes. "Mama has a grandma? Does that make you my great-grandma?" Eleanor's stern expression softened as she looked at Sophie. "I suppose it does, dear child." "What's your name?" "Sophie Marie Cooper," Sophie said proudly. "I'm 7 years old and I can read really well, and I'm going to be the best big sister ever." "I'm sure you are," Eleanor said with a small smile. She looked back at Clara. "Please, I've come a very long way." Against her better judgment, Clara found herself leading Eleanor into the house. She sent Sophie to find Jack in the barn, wanting him there for whatever revelation was coming. Eleanor sat primly on the settee, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the modest but clean parlor. "You've made a nice home here," she said, "very different from what you might have had." "What do you mean?" Clara asked, lowering herself carefully into Jack's chair. Eleanor sighed, suddenly looking every one of her 70-odd years. "Your mother was my daughter, my only child. When she fell in love with your father, a mere bookkeeper with no prospects, I forbade the match. I had grander plans for her, you see. A marriage to the Astley heir, a fortune that would secure our family's position for generations." Clara's mind reeled. "My father said my mother's family disowned her when they married." "We did," Eleanor said, shame coloring her voice. "I was proud, stubborn, convinced I knew what was best. When Catherine, your mother, chose love over wealth, I cut her off completely, told her she was dead to me." She paused, pulling a handkerchief from her sleeve to dab at her eyes. "I didn't even know she'd died in childbirth until years later. By then, your father had disappeared with you, and my pride. My terrible pride wouldn't let me search for you." Jack entered then, Sophie on his heels, and Clara quickly introduced him to Eleanor. Jack's expression was wary but polite as he stood protectively near Clara's chair. "Why now?" Clara asked. "Why find me now?" "Because I'm dying," Eleanor said simply. "The doctors give me perhaps 6 months, and I couldn't go to my grave knowing I had a granddaughter somewhere in the world, living in poverty when she should have had everything." "We're not living in poverty," Jack said, his voice edged with offense. "No," Eleanor agreed, looking around again. "You're living with love, which is more than I can say for the mansion I rattle around in alone." She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick envelope. "Your mother would have inherited everything. As her daughter, it should be yours." Clara stared at the envelope but didn't take it. "I don't want your money." "It's not just money," Eleanor said. "It's your birthright. Your heritage. There's a trust worth nearly $100,000, properties in Philadelphia and New York, investments that generate substantial income. You could give your children every advantage." Sophie gasped. $100,000? That's more money than exists in the whole world. Despite the tension, the adult smiled at the child's innocence. "Mrs. Whitfield," Jack said carefully, "we appreciate you coming all this way, but Clara and I have built our life here. We don't need—" "You don't need," Eleanor interrupted. "But what about your children? What about their education, their opportunities? Clara could have gone to the finest schools, married into society, lived a life of ease. Instead, she worked in a factory. Is that what you want for your daughter? For the baby Clara carries?" Clara felt tears prick her eyes. The old woman's words hit at every insecurity, every worry about providing for their growing family. She thought of Sophie, brilliant Sophie, who devoured every book she could find but had no proper school within 20 miles. She thought of the baby growing inside her who would be born into a life of hard work and uncertainty. "Don't," Jack said quietly, but his voice carried steel. "Don't come here and make Clara feel like what we have isn't enough. She chose this life. She chose us." "After she was forced to," Eleanor countered. "If she'd had money, security, would she have needed to answer a stranger's advertisement for marriage? Would she have ended up in this situation at all?" "This situation," Clara said, finally finding her voice, "is the best thing that ever happened to me. Yes, I came west out of desperation. Yes, I answered that advertisement because I had no other options. But getting off at the wrong station, meeting Jack and Sophie, that wasn't desperation. That was destiny." Eleanor studied her for a long moment. "You sound like your mother. She said something very similar when she chose your father over the life I'd planned for her." "And was she wrong?" Clara challenged. "Were the years she had with my father not worth more than all the money and society connections in the world?" Eleanor's composure finally cracked. "I don't know," she admitted, tears flowing freely now. "I never got to ask her. She died thinking I hated her. Your father sent me one letter, telling me of her death, of your birth, and then nothing. I was too proud to beg for information about my granddaughter. Too proud, and now it's too late to make amends to Catherine, but perhaps it's not too late for you." Sophie, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly moved to Eleanor's side. "Why are you crying, great-grandma?" Eleanor looked down at the child in surprise. "Because I made terrible mistakes, dear one. I let pride cost me my family." "But you're here now," Sophie said practically. "Mama always says it's never too late to say sorry and try to do better. Right, Mama?" Clara felt her heart soften. This bitter, broken old woman was her last link to the mother she'd never known. "Sophie's right," she said quietly. "It's not too late." Eleanor's eyes filled with hope. "You mean—" "I mean, you're welcome to be part of our lives," Clara said. "Not our banker, not our benefactor, but our family. If you can accept that this," she gestured to the simple room, the ranch beyond the windows, "is our life, and we're happy with it. But the money can stay in trust," Jack suggested, "for the children's education if they want it. But Clara and I will continue to build our life with our own hands." Eleanor looked between them, something like admiration dawning in her eyes. "You're quite a pair," she said. "Your mother would have liked you," she told Jack. "She always admired men who worked with their hands. Said they were more honest than the society dandies I tried to introduce her to." Over the next several days, Eleanor stayed in town at Mrs. Abernathy's hotel, but visited the ranch daily. She told Clara stories about her mother, how Catherine had loved music and horses, how she'd been able to make anyone laugh, how she'd stood up to 3 grown men who were beating a stray dog. "You have her courage," Eleanor said one afternoon, watching Clara work in the garden despite her advanced pregnancy, "and her stubbornness." "Is that a compliment?" Clara asked, pausing to ease her aching back. "The highest," Eleanor assured her, "though I didn't always see it that way." Sophie had taken to Eleanor with surprising speed, demanding stories about Philadelphia and the fancy parties Eleanor had attended. Eleanor, in turn, seemed enchanted by Sophie's quick mind and boundless energy. "She should be in school," Eleanor said to Clara one day. "A proper school with real teachers." "The nearest school's in Creekstone," Clara replied. "Too far for daily travel." "Then bring the school here," Eleanor said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "Hire a teacher. There must be other children in the area who need education." Clara and Jack exchanged glances. They'd had the same thought but lacked the funds to make it reality. "That would take money," Jack said carefully. Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. "Consider it my gift to the community, not charity," she added quickly, seeing Jack's expression. "An investment in the future, in my great-grandchildren's future." It was hard to argue with that logic, and within a month Eleanor had arranged for a young teacher from Denver to come to Dust Creek. Miss Patterson was barely 20, fresh from normal school, and eager to prove herself. The makeshift schoolhouse was just a converted barn on the Henderson property, but it was a start. Sophie was beside herself with joy. A real teacher, and other children to learn with. "Mama, can you believe it?" Clara could hardly believe any of it. In the span of a year, she'd gone from a desperate factory worker to a beloved wife and mother. And now she was discovering she had family she'd never known existed. It was almost too much to take in. Eleanor extended her stay week after week, claiming the dry air was good for her health, though Clara suspected she simply didn't want to leave. She'd taken a room permanently at the hotel and could be found most days either at the ranch or helping Miss Patterson set up the schoolhouse. It was Eleanor who was with Clara when the baby decided to come, 2 weeks earlier than expected. Jack had ridden to check on cattle in the far pasture, and Sophie was at school when Clara's water broke. "Oh my!" Clara gasped, gripping the kitchen table. Eleanor, who'd been helping with the mending, was on her feet immediately. "How far apart are the pains?" "I don't know, they just started." Clara broke off as another contraction hit. Eleanor's face went pale, but her voice remained steady. "Sophie, run to the school and tell Miss Patterson to send someone for the doctor and your father. Quickly now." But Sophie had already left for school. It was just the two of them. "I can't do this," Clara panted. "Not without Jack." "Yes, you can," Eleanor said firmly. "You're Catherine's daughter. You can do anything." She helped Clara to the bedroom, her elderly hands surprisingly strong. "I may not have been there for your mother, but I'm here for you now." The next hours were a blur of pain and encouragement, Eleanor never leaving Clara's side. She held Clara's hand, wiped her brow, and when Clara cried out for Jack, Eleanor whispered, "He'll be here soon. You're doing wonderfully. Your mother would be so proud." Jack burst through the door just as the baby's cries filled the air. His face was white with fear that transformed to wonder as Eleanor placed the squalling infant in Clara's arms. "A son," Eleanor said, tears streaming down her face. "You have a son." Jack fell to his knees beside the bed, his hand trembling as he touched the baby's dark hair. "A son," he repeated in awe. "What will you name him?" Eleanor asked. Clara looked at Jack, then at Eleanor. "Thomas," she said, "after my father." She paused, then added, "Thomas Frederick, if that's all right." "Frederick was your husband's name, wasn't it?" Eleanor made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. He would have been honored. Sophie arrived home from school to find she had a baby brother, and her shriek of delight probably scared the chickens into not laying for a week. She immediately appointed herself Thomas's protector and helper, fetching blankets and water and anything else anyone might need. "He's so small," she whispered, gently touching Thomas's tiny fist. "Was I ever that small?" "Smaller," Jack said, ruffling her hair. "You were early. remember? Gave us quite a scare. But I was strong, Sophie said proudly. And Thomas will be too. I'll teach him everything, how to read and swim and ride horses, and let's let him learn to hold his head up first, Clara laughed. As the days passed and Clara recovered, life settled into a new rhythm. Eleanor extended her stay indefinitely, claiming she needed to see Thomas through his first few months at least. She bought a small house in town, scandalizing Mrs. Abernathy by insisting on living alone rather than taking permanent residence at the hotel. I've been surrounded by servants my whole life, Eleanor explained. I'd like to try taking care of myself for once. She was terrible at it, of course. Jack found her trying to cook breakfast one morning and nearly burning down her kitchen. After that, she took most of her meals at the ranch, which suited everyone fine. It was during one of these dinners that Eleanor made an announcement that would change everything. I've been corresponding with my lawyers, she said, setting down her fork. I'm changing my will. Eleanor, Claire began, but the older woman held up her hand. Hear me out. I'm not leaving everything to you, Clara, so don't look so alarmed. I'm dividing the estate. Part will remain in trust for the children's education and future needs, as we discussed. But the bulk of it, I'm using to establish a foundation. A foundation? Jack asked. For women like Clara was, Eleanor explained. Women who need a second chance, a way out of desperate circumstances. The foundation will provide passage west, training in practical skills, and placement with reputable families or businesses. Not as mail-order brides, she added with a wry smile, but as independent women with choices. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Mother would have loved that. Yes, Eleanor agreed. Catherine always championed the underdog. It seems fitting that her inheritance should help other women find their way to better lives. It's wonderful, Clara said, reaching across the table to squeeze Eleanor's hand. There is one condition, Eleanor continued. I want you to run it, Clara. You understand what these women need, what they're facing. You could make real difference. Clara was stunned. I don't know anything about running a foundation. You'll learn, Eleanor said confidently. You've already proven you can adapt to anything. That night, as Clara nursed Thomas while Jack held Sophie as she slept, they talked about Eleanor's proposal. It would mean traveling sometimes, Clara said, to Philadelphia, maybe other cities, to coordinate with agencies there. We could manage, Jack said. Eleanor could watch the children, or they could come with us sometimes. Show them there's a world beyond Dust Creek. You wouldn't mind? Me taking on something like this? Jack shifted Sophie gently and moved to sit beside Clara, his arm around her shoulders. Clara, you've given me and Sophie everything. You've brought this ranch back to life, given us a family again. How could I begrudge you the chance to help other women find what you've found? What we've found, Clara corrected. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Nor I without you, Jack said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Thomas finished nursing and Clara shifted him to her shoulder, patting his back gently. It's strange, she said. A year ago I had nothing. No family, no home, no future I could see. Now I have everything I never dared dream of. And it all started with getting off at the wrong station, Jack mused. The right station, Clara corrected, echoing Sophie's words from months ago. It was always the right station. As spring turned to summer, the foundation began to take shape. Eleanor worked with her lawyers to establish the legal framework, while Clara corresponded with aid societies in eastern cities. The first women would arrive in the fall. 3 factory workers from Baltimore, a widow from Boston, 2 sisters fleeing an abusive situation in New York. Clara insisted each woman's story be evaluated carefully, their needs assessed individually. Some might find work as teachers or seamstresses in growing western towns. Others might start their own businesses with the foundation's support. The point was to give them choices, opportunities, hope. You're changing lives, Eleanor said one evening, watching Clara review applications. Your mother would be so proud. I hope so, Clara said. I wish I could have known her. You do know her, Eleanor said. Every time you help someone else, every time you choose kindness over judgment, love over fear, that's Catherine living on through you. Thomas was 3 months old when Eleanor's health took a turn. She tried to hide it at first, but the coughing fits became harder to conceal, the weakness more apparent. "How long?" Clara asked Dr. Jameson after he'd examined Eleanor. "Hard to say," he replied. "Weeks, maybe a month or two. I'm sorry." Clara found Eleanor on the porch, watching Sophie play with Thomas on a blanket in the yard. "You know," Clara said, sitting beside her grandmother, "I've known for a while," Eleanor admitted. "The doctors in Philadelphia gave me 6 months. It's been 8. These extra months, getting to know you, seeing Thomas born, being part of your family, it's been a gift I didn't deserve." "Don't say that. It's true," Eleanor interrupted gently. "I wasted so many years on pride and propriety. But these last months, I've lived more truly in these months than in all my previous 70 years. "We need more time," Clara said, tears flowing freely. "There's so much more to do, to say." "There's never enough time," Eleanor said. "But we've had this. And you'll continue the work. The foundation will help hundreds of women, thousands maybe. That's a legacy worth leaving." Eleanor moved into the ranch for her final weeks, taking the room that had once been Clara's when she first arrived. Sophie appointed herself Eleanor's special helper, bringing her tea and reading to her from her school primers. Thomas seemed to sense something was wrong, being unusually quiet and content when placed in Eleanor's arms. "He knows I need the peace," Eleanor said, stroking the baby's soft hair. One evening, as the sun set in spectacular reds and golds, Eleanor asked to be helped to the porch. The whole family gathered around her, Clara and Jack, Sophie and Thomas, even Mrs. Henderson and Millicent, who'd become regular visitors. "I want to thank you all," Eleanor said, her voice weak but clear, "for showing me what family really means, for giving me the chance to make amends." "You gave us so much," Clara began. "No," Eleanor said. "You gave me everything. The chance to know my granddaughter, to see my great-grandchildren, to be part of something real and warm and alive. The money, the foundation, that's nothing compared to what you've given me." She passed that night peacefully in her sleep, with Clara holding one hand and Sophie the other. They buried her in the small cemetery outside Dust Creek, next to Margaret's grave. The entire town came to the funeral, even people who'd barely known her because she'd become part of their community in her short time there. "She found her way home," Reverend Williams said at the service. "Sometimes the journey is long and winding, but love always finds its way home." After the funeral, Clara found a letter Eleanor had left for her. "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then my journey has ended and yours continues. Do not grieve too long for me. I've had more happiness in these past months than I deserved, and I go to my rest content knowing you will carry on. The foundation papers are all in order. The first women will arrive soon. Help them as you would have wanted to be helped. Show them that there is kindness in the world, that strangers can become family, that hope is never misplaced. Tell Sophie to keep reading everything she can find. Tell Thomas, when he's old enough, about the great-grandmother who loved him from the moment she saw him. Tell Jack that I couldn't have chosen a better man for you if I'd tried. And you, my dear one, my Catherine's daughter, live. Live fully and bravely and with your whole heart. You've already proven that getting off at the wrong station can lead to exactly where you're meant to be. All my love, Eleanor." The first group of women arrived 2 weeks later, nervous and travel-worn, clutching their few possessions and looking as lost as Clara had once looked. She met them at the station, the same platform where she'd stood just over a year ago, certain her life was ruined. "Welcome to Dust Creek," she said, smiling warmly. "I know this probably isn't what you expected, but sometimes the unexpected turns out to be exactly what we need." One of the women, barely out of her teens, looked around doubtfully. "It's so empty." "It's full of possibility," Clara corrected. "Come, let's get you settled. Tomorrow, we'll talk about your options, your dreams, what you want to build here." As she led them toward town, Sophie running ahead to make sure their temporary lodgings were ready, Thomas secure in Jack's arms as he brought up the rear with their luggage, Clara thought about the strange, winding path that had brought her here. A factory girl from Philadelphia who'd answered a desperate advertisement, a woman who'd gotten off at the wrong station, a mail-order bride who'd found love where she hadn't been looking for it, and now someone who could help other women find their own unexpected happiness. That evening, after the new arrivals were settled and Sophie had been read to sleep, Clara stood on her porch. The porch where Jack had first kissed her, where Eleanor had spent her last sunset, where so much life had happened in such a short time. "Regrets?" Jack asked, coming up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "None," Clara said, leaning back against him. "Not a single one." "Even though you could have been a Philadelphia society lady?" "Living in luxury." Clara turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd given her everything that mattered. "I am living in luxury," she said. "The luxury of being loved, of having a purpose, of knowing I'm exactly where I belong." Thomas cried from inside, and Clara smiled. "Someone's hungry." "I'll get him," Jack offered, but Clara stopped him. "We'll both go," she said. As they walked inside together, Clara glanced back at the evening star just appearing in the darkening sky. Sophie would say it was her great-grandmother, watching over them. Maybe she was right. Or maybe it was Catherine, or Margaret, or all the women who'd taken chances on love and new lives in unlikely places. Either way, Clara whispered a quiet thank you to the star, to the universe, to whatever force had made her get off at the wrong station that hot August day. Because sometimes the wrong station was exactly the right destination. Sometimes mistakes were miracles in disguise. And sometimes a frightened factory girl from Philadelphia could become the architect of hundreds of other women's second chances, all because she'd taken her own. The lamplight spilled warm and golden from the windows of the little ranch house, and inside, a baby's cry turned to contented gurgling as his parents soothed him. In her room, Sophie smiled in her sleep, dreaming of teaching her brother to read. And in town, 3 nervous women looked out at the vast western sky and dared to hope that their lives, too, were about to change for the better. The wrong station, the right destination, the perfect home. Clara Cooper closed the door gently behind her, shutting out the night, keeping in the warmth and light and love that had transformed a mistake into a miracle. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. More women to help, children to raise, a ranch to run, a foundation to build. But tonight, she was simply a woman who'd found her family in the most unexpected place, living proof that sometimes getting lost was the only way to find yourself. And in the small cemetery outside town, 2 gravestones stood side by side. Margaret Cooper, beloved wife and mother, and Eleanor Whitfield, grandmother who found her way home. Different lives, different times, but both part of the same truth. Love transcends death, family transcends blood, and home is wherever brave hearts choose to build it. The stars wheeled overhead, the desert wind whispered through the cottonwoods, and in a small ranch 3 miles north of Dust Creek, a family that shouldn't exist thrived against all odds, proof that God, or fate, or chance, or whatever power governs such things, sometimes answers prayers in the most unexpected ways, all because one woman got off at the wrong station and discovered it was exactly where she was meant to be. 5 years had passed since Eleanor's death, and the foundation she'd helped create had grown beyond anything Clara could have imagined. The small ranch house now had an addition, a proper office, where Clara managed correspondence with aid societies across the country, and a larger kitchen to accommodate the frequent guests who came through their doors. Women seeking new lives, families who'd taken them in, success stories returning to share their joy. It was a crisp October morning when the letter arrived that would shake the very foundation of everything Clara had built. Sophie, now 12 and tall for her age, brought it in from the mail rider, her face curious. "It's from Boston, Mama," she said, handing over the expensive envelope. "Fancy paper, must be important." Clara's hands trembled slightly as she opened it, though she couldn't say why. Perhaps it was the official-looking seal, or the way the handwriting seemed somehow familiar despite being unknown. "My dear Mrs. Cooper," the letter began, "I write to you with information that will no doubt come as a shock. My name is Harrison Bennett, and I am your father's brother, the uncle you never knew existed." Clara sank into her chair, the letter shaking in her hands. Sophie immediately came to her side. "Mama? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. Just unexpected news. Could you check on Thomas? Make sure he's not trying to climb the barn ladder again?" Sophie hesitated, clearly wanting to know more, but obediently went to find her 5-year-old brother. Claire continued reading. Your father and I had been estranged for 20 years before his death. He chose love over family expectations, marrying your mother against our parents' wishes. I, being young and foolish, sided with our parents. It is a decision I have regretted every day since. Recently, I learned of your existence through a mutual acquaintance who had dealings with the Whitfield Foundation. The work you are doing, the life you have built, it would make your father proud. He always championed those less fortunate, much to our parents' dismay. I am writing now because I am dying. Like your grandmother Eleanor, I find myself at the end of my life, desperate to make amends for the years of stubborn pride. But unlike Eleanor, I have no fortune to offer, no grand gesture to make. I have only the truth and a warning. There are others who know of your existence now. Our cousin, William Bennett, has discovered that you are alive and married with children of your own. He believes he has a claim to the Whitfield estate through you, some complex legal argument about inheritance rights and blood relations. He's not a good man, Clara. He has left a trail of ruined businesses and broken promises across the eastern seaboard. And now he turns his attention westward to you. I write to warn you, he will come. He will arrive with lawyers and documents and smooth words. He will try to insinuate himself into your life, claim family bonds, and ultimately attempt to control the Foundation's assets through you. Do not trust him. I would come myself to help you face this threat, but I'm confined to my bed, unlikely to last the month. Instead, I send you this warning, and with it, all the documentation I could gather about William's past schemes. Use it to protect yourself and your family. Your father would be so proud of the woman you've become. I pray you can forgive an old man's decades of foolishness. Your uncle, Harrison Bennett. Clara set the letter down with trembling hands. Just when life had settled into a rhythm, when the Foundation was thriving and her family was happy, here came another ghost from a past she'd never known existed. Clara! Jack's voice from the doorway made her jump. Sophie said you looked upset. She handed him the letter wordlessly, watching his face darken as he read. This William Bennett, Jack said slowly. If he's really coming here... We need to be prepared, Clara finished. But how do we prepare for someone we know nothing about beyond this warning? Jack pulled her to her feet and into his arms. We face it together, like we always do. You're not the desperate, alone woman who got off that train 6 years ago. You have family, friends, a whole community who would stand with you. But if he has legal claim to Eleanor's estate, then we'll fight it legally. The Foundation has good lawyers. Eleanor made sure of that. Before Clara could respond, they heard horses approaching, multiple horses, moving fast. Jack moved to the window, his hand instinctively going to where his rifle stood by the door. 3 men, he reported. City clothes. Expensive horses. Clara's stomach dropped. It can't be. The letter just arrived. Maybe Harrison Bennett underestimated how fast his cousin would move, Jack said grimly. They went out onto the porch together, presenting a united front. The lead rider was a man in his 40s, handsome in a sharp, calculating way, with dark hair silvered at the temples and a smile that didn't reach his cold blue eyes. The family resemblance to Clara was unmistakable. "Cousin Clara!" he called out, dismounting with practiced ease. "At last we meet. I'm William Bennett, your father's cousin, and you must be the fortunate Mr. Cooper." "Mr. Bennett," Clara said coolly. "This is unexpected." "Is it?" William's smile widened. "Surely Uncle Harrison's letter must have arrived by now. The old fool always did like to meddle." "You knew he was writing to me?" "My dear cousin, I make it my business to know everything that might affect my interests." He gestured to his companions. "These are my associates, Mr. Hartley and Mr. Stone, legal representatives." "If you're here about the Whitfield estate," Jack began. "Oh, I'm here about so much more than that," William interrupted smoothly. "I'm here about family, about connections too long severed, about opportunities that could benefit us all." Thomas chose that moment to come running around the house, chasing a chicken, with Sophie in pursuit. Both children stopped short at the sight of the strangers. "And these must be the children," William said, his eyes lighting with interest that made Clara's maternal instincts scream danger. "The next generation of Bennetts." "Coopers," Jack corrected firmly. They're Cooper's. Of course. Of course. William waved dismissively. But blood tells, doesn't it? I can see the Bennett features in both of them. Especially the boy. He's the image of his grandfather at that age. You knew my father? Clara asked, despite herself. Knew him? My dear, I grew up with him. Before he threw everything away for that inappropriate match with your mother. He must have seen Clara's face darken because he quickly added, though clearly it produced exceptional results in you. State your business, Mr. Bennett, Jack said. We have work to do. William's friendly mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something harder underneath. Very well. Let's discuss business. I believe there are questions about the proper distribution of the Whitfield estate. Eleanor Whitfield had no right to establish that foundation without consideration of blood relatives. I was her blood relative, Clara pointed out. Her granddaughter. Yes, but you were also a married woman when she made her will. Under certain interpretations of the law, your husband became the beneficiary, not you. And as a male Cooper, he has no claim to Bennett or Whitfield family assets. That's ridiculous, Clara said. Is it? Mr. Hartley here is quite expert in inheritance law. Would you like to hear his interpretation? The lawyer, a thin man with sharp features, stepped forward. The legal precedents are actually quite complex. Save it, Jack interrupted. We have our own lawyers. Yes, the Foundation's lawyers, William said. But are they really your lawyers or the Foundation's? There's a difference, you know. And if the Foundation itself is legally questionable. What do you want? Clara asked bluntly. William smiled again, that cold expression that reminded her uncomfortably of Theodore Morrison. I want what's fair. The Whitfield fortune was built over generations. It shouldn't be frittered away on charity cases. It should remain in the family. The Foundation helps women in desperate situations, factory girls and prostitutes and runaways, William interrupted dismissively, hardly a worthy use of a great family's legacy. Clara felt Jack tense beside her and put a restraining hand on his arm. Those women deserve chances at better lives. Perhaps, but not at the expense of family patrimony. William's eyes glittered. However, I'm not unreasonable. I'm willing to compromise. Give me a position on the Foundation's board. Let me have a say in how the money is distributed. We can work together, cousin. And if we refuse, then I'll be forced to pursue legal remedies. Tie up the Foundation's assets in court for years. Think of all the women who won't be helped while lawyers argue. Think of the damage to your reputation, to your children's future prospects. You're threatening us, Jack said flatly. I'm offering partnership, William corrected. There's a difference. Before Clara could respond, another rider appeared on the road, moving fast, kicking up dust. As the figure grew closer, Clara recognized Maria, the woman who'd helped her escape from Morrison all those years ago. She'd stayed in Dust Creek, running a successful bakery, and she and Clara had become close friends. Clara! Maria called out, not even dismounting properly before rushing over. I rode as fast as I could. There's news from Boston. She stopped short, seeing William and his associates. Her face went pale. Maria, Clara said, concerned. What is it? Maria's eyes never left William's face. I know you, she whispered. You were in Creekstone. With Senor Morrison. You were his lawyer. William's expression didn't change, but Clara saw his hand twitch slightly. You must be mistaken, madam. I've never been to Creekstone. No mistake, Maria said firmly. You came to the house many times. You helped Morrison with his business, the women he brought from the East, the ones who disappeared. What? Clara's blood ran cold. What women? Maria turned to her, her face grave. Before you there were others. Mail-order brides Morrison sent for. They came, but they never left. Never married him either. They just disappeared. This man, she pointed at William, he handled the legal papers, made it all look proper. William's friendly facade finally cracked completely. This woman is obviously confused. I am not confused, Maria said fiercely. I remember everything, the crying in the locked rooms, the bruises, the way you and Morrison would laugh over Brandy about breaking them in. Jack stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You son of a—" "Careful, Mr. Cooper," Williams said coldly. "Assault would not help your case, and this woman's wild accusations mean nothing without proof." "Morrison kept records," Maria said. "Hidden in his house. I know where. I could never get them before, but the house is empty now, falling apart. You could trespass on private property based on the ravings of a Mexican baker?" William laughed, but it sounded forced. "Please, no court would accept such evidence." "Maybe not," a new voice said from behind them. "But they'd accept mine." Everyone turned to see Sheriff Coleman from Creekstone riding up. With him was an elderly man Clara didn't recognize. "Judge Patterson," William said, his face going pale. "What are you doing here?" "Getting to the bottom of a case I should have investigated years ago," the judge replied. "When Sheriff Coleman contacted me about Morrison's activities, I started digging. Imagine my surprise when your name kept coming up, Mr. Bennett. This is harassment. This is justice," the judge interrupted. "Delayed, but not denied." "We found the records, Bennett, all of them, including your payments for services rendered, procuring women under false pretenses, fraud, conspiracy. The list goes on." William looked around wildly, calculating his chances. His two associates had already backed away, clearly wanting no part of this. "You can't prove anything," he said desperately. "Those records could mean anything." "They could," Sheriff Coleman agreed, "but combined with the testimony of 3 women we've located, women who escaped Morrison's ranch and have been too terrified to speak until now, they paint a pretty clear picture." "And then there's my testimony," another voice added. Clara gasped. Walking up the road, thin and travel-worn but very much alive, was Harrison Bennett, her uncle. "Harrison," William snarled, "you're supposed to be dying." "I was. Amazing how the prospect of seeing you brought to justice improved my health." Harrison was leaning heavily on a cane, clearly weak, but his eyes burned with determination. "I've brought additional documentation, Sheriff. Records of Williams' activities in Boston, Philadelphia, New York. This isn't his first scheme involving vulnerable women." Williams' hand moved toward his coat, but Jack was faster, grabbing his wrist and twisting until a small derringer fell to the ground. "That's enough evidence for me," Sheriff Coleman said, moving forward with shackles. "William Bennett, you're under arrest." "This isn't over," William shouted as he was restrained. "I have rights. I have connections." "You have a date with justice," Judge Patterson said grimly. "Long overdue." As William and his associates were led away, Clara found herself face to face with Harrison Bennett. Up close, she could see the family resemblance. He had her father's eyes, kind despite the years of pain etched around them. "Uncle Harrison," she said softly. "Clara." His voice broke slightly. "You look so much like your mother. But you have your father's spirit, that combination of gentleness and steel. You came all this way, sick as you are. I owed it to my brother, to you, to all the women William hurt." He swayed slightly, and Jack quickly brought a chair from the porch. As Harrison sat, catching his breath, Maria approached Clara. "I'm sorry I never told you about the other women. I was afraid." "You saved me," Clara interrupted, embracing her friend. "That's all that matters." "Actually," Harrison said, his voice stronger now, "you saved many others. Your escape from Morrison, your survival, your thriving, it gave other women courage to speak out. Your foundation has helped dozens of women avoid similar fates. Sophie, who had been uncharacteristically quiet through all of this, suddenly spoke up. So that bad man wanted to steal our money and hurt more women?" "Yes, sweetheart," Clara said, pulling her daughter close. "But we stopped him," Sophie said firmly, "because we're a family, and families protect each other. And because good people stand up to bad people," Jack added, ruffling Thomas's hair as the boy pressed against his leg, confused by all the drama. Harrison smiled weakly. "Wisdom from the mouths of babes." He looked at Clara. "I know I have no right to ask, but might I stay for a few days? Get to know my brother's daughter and her family. I promise not to be a burden." Clara looked at Jack, who nodded slightly. "Of course," she said, Family is always welcome here. Over the next week, Harrison shared stories of Clara's father as a young man, his love of books, his sense of justice, his terrible singing voice that he insisted on inflicting on others. Clara treasured each memory, feeling like she was finally getting to know the man who'd raised her, but had always seemed so distant, so wrapped in his own grief. "He never recovered from losing your mother," Harrison said one evening as they sat on the porch. "But he loved you fiercely. Every choice he made was to protect you, even if it meant cutting ties with everyone from his past." "Including you," Clara said gently. "Especially me." Harrison sighed. "I represented everything he was running from. Family expectations, social obligations, the cage of propriety. He was right to run. I see that now." "It's not too late," Clara said. "You're here now. You stood up to William. You're helping make things right." Harrison was quiet for a moment, watching Sophie try to teach Thomas to play marbles in the yard. "Your foundation," he said finally. "Would you consider expanding it? Not just helping women come west, but protecting them from predators like William and Morrison?" "What do you mean?" "I may not have Eleanor Whitfield's fortune, but I'm not without resources. I want to establish a legal defense fund within your foundation. Lawyers who will protect vulnerable women, investigate suspicious arrangements, ensure no one else suffers what you almost did." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "That would be wonderful. Your father was a bookkeeper, you know, meticulous with records. It's what made him good at his job, but also what made him dangerous to people like William. He could always follow the money, find the truth in the numbers." Harrison smiled sadly. "I think you would appreciate using that same attention to detail to protect others." The Legal Defense Fund was established within a month. Harrison stayed in Dust Creek, taking a room at the hotel, but spending most of his time at the ranch. His health improved somewhat in the dry desert air, though it was clear he would never fully recover. It was Harrison who was with Clara when the letter came from Boston 3 months later, the verdict in William's trial. Guilty on all counts, 25 years in prison. "It's over," Clara said, setting down the letter. "No," Harrison corrected gently. "It's just beginning. Every woman your foundation helps, every predator your lawyers stop. That's your father's legacy living on. And your mother's. And Eleanor's." Clara looked out the window to where Jack was teaching Thomas to ride a horse, the boys' delighted laughter carrying on the wind. Sophie was in the barn, probably reading to the cats again. The newest group of women helped by the foundation were at the schoolhouse, learning skills that would help them build new lives. "You know what I've learned?" Clara said to her uncle. "Sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things. If I hadn't been desperate enough to answer Morrison's advertisement, if I hadn't gotten off at the wrong station, if Morrison hadn't shown his true nature, none of this would exist. The foundation, this family, this life." Harrison nodded slowly. "Your father used to say something similar, that God writes straight with crooked lines." "Sophie would agree with that," Clara laughed. "She still insists God sent me to them on that train." "Maybe she's right," Harrison said. "Maybe all of our wrong turns were just leading us to where we needed to be." That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, including Harrison, Maria, the Hendersons, and 2 of the women from the foundation who had nowhere else for the holiday, Clara stood to make a toast. "To wrong stations that turn out to be right destinations," she said, raising her glass. "To family found in unexpected places. To second chances and new beginnings. And to Mama," Sophie added, "who got off at the wrong station and made everything right." "To Clara," everyone echoed, and Clara felt her heart swell with emotion. After dinner, as the guests dispersed and the children were put to bed, Clara and Jack stood on their porch, their sanctuary, their planning place, their refuge. "Any regrets?" Jack asked, as he did sometimes. Clara thought about it, about the scared factory girl who'd boarded a train in Philadelphia, about the desperate woman who'd stood on the platform in Dust Creek, about the terrified bride-to-be locked in Morrison's house. Each version of herself had led to this moment, standing beside the man she loved, having helped dozens of women find better lives, raising children who would carry on the work of compassion and justice. "How could I regret the path that led me to you?" she asked. "To this." Jack pulled her close, and they stood together watching the stars emerge in the vast western sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more women to help, children to guide, a foundation to run, a ranch to maintain. But tonight, in this moment, everything was perfect. Do you really think Sophie was right? Jack asked suddenly. That God sent you to us? Clara considered the question. All the moments that had led to this, her father's death, the desperate advertisement, the torn map, the wrong station, Morrison's cruelty, Maria's courage, Eleanor's arrival, Harrison's intervention. Each seemed random, but together they formed a pattern too perfect to be chance. I think, she said carefully, that sometimes we're guided to where we need to be, even when we think we're lost. Especially when we think we're lost. The wrong station, Jack mused. The perfect station, Clara corrected, and kissed him under the stars that had witnessed their entire unlikely love story. Inside the house, Sophie smiled in her sleep, dreaming of the story she would tell her own children someday, about how her mama got off at the wrong station and found her family waiting there, about how God answers prayers in mysterious ways, about how love is stronger than fear and family is more than blood. And in his bed, little Thomas dreamed of horses and wide open spaces, unaware that his very existence was proof of miracles, that he was living evidence of what could happen when desperate chances led to unexpected grace. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of coming rain. The desert would bloom again soon, as it always did after the storms. And the little ranch 3 miles north of Dust Creek stood as testament to the power of wrong turns that lead to right destinations, of strangers who become family, a love that transforms the most ordinary places into sacred ground. Harrison Bennett lived another 2 years, long enough to see the Legal Defense Fund save 17 women from fraudulent marriage schemes. He died peacefully, surrounded by the family he'd thought he'd lost forever, knowing that his brother would have forgiven him, that redemption was possible even at the end of a life. They buried him next to Eleanor in the Dust Creek Cemetery, and Clara planted roses between the graves, yellow for Eleanor, who had loved all things bright and bold, and white for Harrison, who had found purity of purpose in his final years. Standing at the graveside, Clara's hand in his, Jack said quietly, "They're all together now. Margaret, Eleanor, Harrison, watching over us." "Mama says they're our guardian angels," Sophie said, now 14 and wise beyond her years, "that they make sure we stay on the right path even when it looks wrong." Thomas, 7 and full of energy, tugged on Clara's skirt. "Mama, will we have to go to the wrong station to find our families, too?" Clara knelt down to his level, smoothing his unruly hair that was so like Jack's. "Maybe, sweetheart. Or maybe your wrong station will be something else entirely. The important thing is to be brave enough to get off the train when your heart tells you to, even if your head says it's a mistake." "That's confusing," Thomas complained. "Life often is," Jack said, swooping the boy up onto his shoulders. "But that's what makes it an adventure." As they walked back toward the ranch, Clara looked back once at the cemetery, at the 5 graves that held people who had shaped her life in different ways. Margaret, who had loved Jack and Sophie first. Theodore Morrison, who had been buried quietly after dying in prison, unmourned but necessary to remember as a cautionary tale. Eleanor, who had given her the means to help others. Harrison, who had shown that redemption was always possible. And one more, a small stone marking the baby Clara had lost the previous winter. A daughter who had lived only 3 days, but who had been loved fiercely for every moment. Life and death, joy and sorrow, wrong turns and right destinations, all of it woven together into a tapestry that was beautiful, not despite its irregular patterns, but because of them. "Mama," Sophie said, taking her hand, "do you think someday someone will write our story? About how you got off at the wrong station and everything that came after?" Clara smiled. "Maybe, but the important thing isn't whether our story gets told. It's that we lived it, that we made choices that mattered, that we loved bravely and helped freely, and never forgot that sometimes the best things come from the worst mistakes." "I'll write it," Sophie declared, "when I'm older. I'll write it all down so other women know that getting off at the wrong station might be the best thing that ever happens to them." "I think that's a wonderful idea," Clara said, squeezing her daughter's hand. As they crested the rise that brought the ranch into view, Clara saw the newest group of women from the foundation sitting on the porch, learning to sew from Maria. Their faces were tired but hopeful, their hands uncertain but willing. Each one had taken a desperate chance, trusted strangers, gotten off at their own wrong stations. And here, in this unlikely place, they would find what Clara had found. Not just safety or security, but possibility. The chance to become more than they had ever dared dream. "Welcome home," Clara whispered, not just to the women on the porch, but to herself, to the scared factory girl she had been, to the desperate bride who had stepped off that train 6 years ago. Home. Not a place she had found, but one she had built, choice by choice, day by day. With a man who had been brave enough to love again, and a little girl who had seen angels where others saw only strangers. The wrong station, the right destination, the perfect life, imperfect and glorious and absolutely, completely, miraculously hers.